That night the man indulged in lovemaking. His partner moaned with pleasure. He purred contentedly. Afterwards they both lay on the carpet in a spacious room with a fireplace. The flames of the fire illuminated their tired bodies. Through the locked door the girl heard loving moans and requests to continue. She was horrified by what was happening under her nose. Right now behind this door her husband was cheating on her with another, and 10 hours ago the servants were all ears. Washed, scrubbed, decorated. The wedding cake with figures of the newlyweds was decorated with flowers. The girl wore luxurious wedding jewelry. The hem of a starched, luxurious dress rustled. She gave the last orders to the servants. The owner was nowhere to be seen. Recently the girl rarely saw him. The servants did not see him in the garden. The mistress ordered the servants to check once again whether everything was ready for the holiday. And she decided to look for her future husband. The girl looked into the office. She called. But there was no one there. She seriously wondered where her husband could have gone just before the celebration. On the table she saw unusual-looking boxes with painted sides. The lock to it was in the form of a coat of arms. Curiosity prevailed. Our heroine opened the coat of arms lock. She saw an incredibly beautiful product inlaid with a huge chrysolite. Lately, it seemed to the girl that they had begun to move away from each other. It could be that she was always busy preparing for their 5th wedding anniversary. She decided to pretend as if she had not seen or opened anything. She closed the box. I tried to return it to its original position on the table. The girl returned to the hall. Her chosen one, surrounded by men, sipped wine as if in nothing. She asked in surprise that he was here all the time. He greeted her with a touch of his hand and a gentle kiss. They were congratulated on their 5th wedding anniversary. They said that the couple looked great together. They politely and courteously thanked the lady who approached. One of the girls gave Madame a gift. She was shy and wasn't sure whether her mistress would like him. The gift box contained a delicate decoration inlaid with opal stones. She remembered that George had also prepared a necklace as a gift. Of the celebration interpreted the pause for memories in her own way. She asked if she liked her gift. The hostess of the evening began to praise the donated necklace. The lady who gave the jewelry said that it would allow its owner to communicate with angels. She noticed that the hostess of the evening did not wear jewelry. Therefore, she offered to try on what had just been presented to her. The maid helped her mistress fasten the product. The girl did not specifically wear necklaces for the celebration that evening, because she was expecting a gift from her husband George. The giver delightedly praised her gift and the hostess of the evening in it. She said that it was as if it was created for her. The girl politely responded to the lady's praises, noticing her keen gaze. The hostess of the evening wondered where her husband had gone. George was busy. He entertained a group of guests. The girl asked the maid where Lisbeth was. She replied that she was not sure, but the celebration has just begun, so she will probably come soon. On this happy day, the girl wanted Lisbeth to be there. She was so sweet, her little sister. A young lady appeared in the celebration hall, melodiously clicking the heels of her tiny shoes. Her green eyes, delicate facial features, chiseled hands, everything betrayed her noble origin. The hostess of the celebration was one of the first to notice the newcomer. She called her by name. She was so looking forward to her appearance at this celebration. The sisters approached. That necklace was on Lisbeth's neck. Yes, it was the same one that was in her husband George's office. An unpleasant guess crept into our heroine's head. Her husband George is cheating on her with her sister. She could not hold back the tears in her eyes from frustration and resentment. She was betrayed by both people close to her. The younger sister asked for forgiveness for her slight delay. They were separated by a fairly large distance when talking. The eldest of their sisters asked for the necklace. Lisbeth happily replied that it was given to her. I asked the eldest for her opinion on how she liked it. The lady was surprised that Lisbeth had been seeing someone lately. She tenderly held the decoration on her chest. She joked that it was her secret. The youngest of the sisters retorted that today, the main character should be the eldest of them. She held hands and congratulated the hostess of the evening on her 5th wedding anniversary. George noticed Lisbeth's appearance. He went up to greet her. He smiled contentedly and cooed to her, and her eyes simply glowed with green lights. She briefly congratulated her sister's husband. She was grateful that he took care of his older sister all these years that they were together. He also expressed words of gratitude to the younger one. He said that he was grateful to her for being with them. At the sight of everything that was happening, our heroine almost fainted. The lady next to her came to her senses to help, asked Madame Royd if she was all right. The sister also rushed to help. She suggested that the eldest leave so that she could be seated if she was not feeling well. The girl replied that everything was fine with her and nothing serious. She's just been a little sleep-deprived the last few days. She assured that it should get better after a little rest. The youngest of the sisters remembered and decided to give her gift now. She said that she tried to surround her with care this year. The hostess of the evening tensed her face. She wondered if her sister's conscience was gnawing at her for sleeping with George. The girl decided to be curious about what kind of gift Lisbeth gave her. In the box, exactly as she had seen in her husband's office, was a chrysolite brooch. The sister explained that this is the May zodiac stone. This symbolizes family happiness. Lisbeth reminded George if he had prepared a gift. He replied that he would present it a little later, so that she doesn't worry about it. Lisbeth didn't worry about anything. She knew that George was simply perfect for her big sister. The evening celebrating their 5th wedding anniversary was over. The guests slowly went home. Lisbeth praised her sister's efforts in organizing the evening, and now she offered to have dinner. She replied that she wanted to skip the meal today, that he doesn't feel very well and wants to rest. Madame Royd invited her sister to have dinner with George. She needed to calmly think about everything herself in silence and without unnecessary emotions. After all, there was no indisputable evidence of her husband's affair with Lisbeth. The girl understood that it was some kind of nonsense, a romance between brothers-in-law, and she decided to find out the whole truth. She came to her husband's office. After all, the necklace was definitely lying here on the table just recently. And now it's gone. George came out to meet her. He asked what she was doing here. The girl replied that she was just waiting for him. George asked why wait for him. Madame Royd reminded him of what he had said at the party, that he had a gift for her, but postponed the delivery until later. The girl portrayed curiosity and impatience on her face. I asked what his gift was, and couldn't my husband hand it over now? George hesitated. He replied that he had ordered a dress, but it hasn't arrived yet, that I ordered it abroad, and ships are sometimes delayed because the situation at sea may be unstable. The husband hugged his wife. He expressed his regrets. I blamed myself that I should have predicted the force majeure and ordered the gift in advance. George's wife also announced a gift. She said that she also prepared something, but she promised to show me that night. She asked if he would come to his bedroom today. After all, today was a special day in their lives. George was extremely surprised by her question. He began to mumble something incomprehensible. He convinced her that due to her poor health, they should wait until next time. He assured that his wife's health was most important to him. Our heroine went to rest in her room. Luxurious, spacious bed, soft pillows, and a soft blanket. She soon left it all, putting on her slippers. She asked herself a question. And what is her husband George doing at this very moment? She heard footsteps. Our heroine went downstairs from her bedroom. The girl thought that she was simply going crazy. She walked to the door of her husband's office. Madame Royd couldn't believe herself. But behind the door she heard loving moans. At this time her husband was enjoying another woman, and he confessed his love to her. Our heroine returned to her room. She sat down on the bed to think. Now she had to admit to herself that the two of them were having an affair. She thought about it. What should she do next? She and George had no children, so it won't be difficult for them to get a divorce. But the girl also understood that she couldn't just leave him for no apparent reason. Having broken the man figurine on the cake, she decided to take revenge. In the morning, our heroine, sitting at breakfast, looked pale. The maid noticed that Madame had an unhealthy complexion. The girl hatched a plan for revenge. She understood that she could not do everything alone. That's why she needed an assistant. She began to sort out candidates from servants to become assistants. Miss Venigans helped George. Most likely, most of the people from the mansion were on the husband's side. They undoubtedly knew about everything. They just didn't tell her. The girl asked the maid Margaret to come to her later. She said that she wanted to tell her something important. George came in. He wished his wife Rihanna good morning. I asked if she slept well today. Our heroine admitted that she would not have said that, and she didn't sleep well that night. George sat down next to her at the table. The man was surprised. I asked the reason for my wife's poor sleep. He said he even let her rest last night. Rihanna said she thought he didn't sleep that night either. He asked the reason for this opinion. His wife told him that he looked tired. George was surprised by this statement. He claimed that he slept quite soundly today. Lisbeth hurried to join them. She greeted her sister and the Count. I wished them good morning. Rihanna responded to her sister's morning greeting. I was wondering how my younger sister slept today. She replied that it was simply wonderful. Lisbeth asked how her older sister slept. Did she get enough sleep? She admitted that she didn't get much rest. The youngest of the sisters said that it is not surprising that Rihanna looks bad now. She advised her to start eating well and getting enough sleep at night. Lisbeth claimed that she wanted to finally have a nephew. Rihanna found these words difficult to take. Rihanna asked her sister about the man who gave her that peridot necklace. She said that it seemed like they closed this topic yesterday. The younger one denied it. She said she wanted to wait until Rihanna was ready to be introduced to that man. Our heroine was thinking about the word going to. Probably the sister was getting ready and then the wife found them together. Rihanna said that her younger sister is already 23 years old, and she is the eldest and has been married for 5 years. The eldest said that she was too indifferent to her sister, and she reminded me of what could happen if the youngest did not get married. Lisbeth thanked her sister for her concern. She answered that she was not thinking about marriage yet. Rihanna insisted that her younger sister bring her boyfriend. The girl continued to insist. She asked to invite the man whom her sister wants to get engaged to visit them to meet. Our heroine asked why her sister so avoided introducing her family to her chosen one. She said that it looked as if she didn't want to introduce them to everyone. Lisbeth replied that she just wanted to be careful. She reminded her that it had already happened that her engagement had been broken off. Therefore, Lisbeth did not want to rush things, so as not to experience pain again. She burst into tears. She asked me to forgive her for ruining everyone's mood at breakfast. George attacked his wife. He accused her of disturbing the wounds of a peacefully living person. The girl did not consider herself guilty. She told herself that her only mistake was meeting these two. It was those two who were to blame for everything. She swore to herself that she would do anything to enjoy their fall. You just had to wait a little. Rihanna was taking a bath. The transparent water shone blue. Flower petals floated in it. The mistress told the maid about everything. She was extremely surprised that her master and Lady Lisbeth. She asked what to do now. The girl said that everything happened in this house, and something like this would be difficult to hide without the help of servants. That's why the lady chose her, because she was the only person in the mansion whom she could trust. Rihanna asked the maid Margaret if she could help her. She answered in the affirmative. She agreed to do everything to be useful to Mrs. The girl warned that the maid would have to become a thorn in the side of her younger sister. She assured her mistress that she had arrived at the estate to serve her. Rihanna thanked the maid. I hugged her. She said that she was very glad that she was there for her and would help with everything. Margaret was combing her mistress's hair. She decided to ask if she was thinking about divorce. The girl said that she just had to get a divorce, but only after she dealt with George. The lady told Margaret that she needed help with something. The maid was surprised by the decision. Our heroine remembered. Lisbeth once said that she did not want to get married. It was worth helping her with this. She recalled that her father was strongly against her marriage to George. Her chosen one was from the House of Royd, officials in every generation. Her father was disturbed by the fact that George had not yet been appointed to a position at his age. Then the father agreed with her decision. He promised that he could not allow a man's pride to suffer while he was her husband. At that time, they had a conversation. The father asked if George would agree to manage the hotel with Rihanna. The father turned out to be right. Her chosen one turned out to be a bastard, unable to justify the trust and respect placed in him. The girl, out of excess of emotions, broke a framed photo of them together. The girl promised herself that divorce would be only her first step. She won't let him just leave. Let her husband wait impatiently for her revenge. George came in. He said that he had to confess something to her. What he originally wanted to say about this later. The husband told Rihanna that he finally got the position. This news surprised our heroine. It turned out that he passed the test to become an official without telling her about it. The man said that it was thanks to the recommendations of the Duke of Macdonald that he was accepted. As expected, he was an unprincipled man. The girl congratulated. After all, her husband always dreamed of this position. She was sure that her late father would also be happy. George was glad that everyone now recognized his abilities and potential. Neither his father nor his brothers knew about them. Lisbeth came in and heard everything. She suggested celebrating such an event. Soon she brought a bottle of wine. George made a toast to the happiness of the three of them. Lisbeth glowed with happiness. Rihanna was a little stressed. They drank. Our heroine endured. She realized that the more her husband lost, the better off she would be. Lisbeth asked Rihanna if she would be working today. She said she was proud of her sister's hard work. The girl was interested in how her youngest was doing. She replied that she was invited to the Marquis Ezra's tea party. Rihanna asked her sister to be careful. She promised without fail. On this, they parted. After saying goodbye to her sister, Lisbeth went up the stairs. She hummed quietly to herself. Eagerly anticipating the meeting, she opened the door. George was already looking forward to her. The man told her in her ear that Rihanna was still at home, but Lisbeth assured him that her sister had just left. She hurriedly began to unbutton his shirt. The girl deftly straddled the man. She asked me to think only about her. They began to give in to passion. After everything happened, he tenderly kissed the girl, tired of the caresses. Lisbeth opened her eyes after a short sleep. George asked if she slept well. She hummed briefly in response. The girl said that she had to leave now, but the man assured her that they still had time. So why doesn't she stay a little longer? She said she couldn't. She asked her not to bother her. The man said that she was too nice, that's why he asked her. She called him a lecher. She hugged and laughed. At the tea party, all the talk is about the news. There was a rumor that that pervert had reappeared. The madman wrote letters for 5 years. The girls told Lisbeth to be careful, to take care of herself. She answered not to worry about her so much. She already wanted to quickly return home to George. The next morning, the three of them had breakfast in the open area. The gentle rays of sunshine and fresh air invigorated the spirit. Lisbeth asked her eldest what it was. The girl replied that she found the letter when she was returning home. Rihanna suggested that it was her sister's boyfriend who sent her a love letter in a letter. The eldest said that she could hardly contain her curiosity to find out the contents of the letter. But Lisbeth took the envelope away, saying that it was her personal. The youngest of the sisters went into the eldest's room, locking the shit. She opened the envelope, at a loss as to who it was addressed to. The contents of the message left the young girl very confused. It contained words of recognition in beautiful handwriting. Lisbeth thought that the scoundrel was looking for a lonely lady, that this is some kind of psycho. She furiously tore the message into small pieces and threw it in the trash. The older sister did not let the younger sister pass with her questions. She wondered how serious things were with that man. The younger one couldn't understand why anyone should be interested in this. Why is she being asked about this again? Rihanna then reported that Margaret found that controversial letter in the trash can of her, Rihanna's room. She insisted on answering whether she was dating such a man. Lisbeth admitted that at first she also thought that her boyfriend wrote the letter. However, it turned out that it was intended for unmarried single noblewomen. The eldest claimed that she was also shocked. She asked why her sister did not immediately tell her about such a message. Rihanna didn't let go of her sister's shoulders. She carefully instructed the youngest. She said that for the sake of safety, she should get married as soon as possible. She said that she insists on inviting her lover to them this week for a close acquaintance, that he should also know about everything. She insisted on discussing what happened. Lisbeth said it wouldn't work, because they recently broke up. The eldest, worried about her sister, asked how she was feeling. The younger one, smiling, insisted that everything was fine with her. After all, the light didn't shine on that man. Rihanna agreed with her sister's position, and she said that she simply could not allow her to remain alone in such a situation. She promised to find her a suitable groom in the near future. The next time Lisbeth and George met, the girl was on edge. He asked her to calm down. It infuriated her that her sister kept buzzing in her ear about marriage. She said that after that letter from the pervert, the sister finally got it into her head that she had to marry her off. For her, it was simply unbearable. The man gently held the girl by the shoulders. I asked him not to worry so much, that my sister is just talking nonsense. Lisbeth was crying. She told the man that they needed to speed up their plan. The musicians played live music. Soloist, cello. The clink of glasses was heard. They danced and had fun in the luxurious, spacious hall. George and Rihanna greeted the guests. The host of the evening welcomed the Duke of Macdonald. He answered the greeting with a friendly pat on the shoulder. George introduced his wife to the older interlocutor. Rihanna responded politely. She said that it was an honor for her to meet his lordship. The Duke paid a compliment to the lady. He said that she is as beautiful as they say about her. Rihanna laughed it off. She thanked me for recommending my husband's candidacy for the position. The noble and influential guest retorted. He referred to the fact that Count Royd was quite successful in managing the Norden Hotel. The Duke argued that a good manager is a good official. He winked cheerfully and friendly at the young Count, holding a glass of wine in his hand. Rihanna was surprised by this statement. Is George a successful leader? She knew that all successes were the result of her efforts with her father, and nothing more. And George was an ordinary puppet. Lisbeth appeared in the hall like a peahen. Covering her sly grin with her fan, she looked for George. He immediately caught the shameless woman's gaze. Having quickly come up with an excuse about the need to visit the restroom, he left. The Count crossed the hall with a sweeping step. To cut it short, he had to push his way between the dancers. A fan slapped him on the shoulder from behind. A female voice asked who he was looking for. It was his Lisbeth. She asked him not to rush, that she will leave first, and he a little later, gently patting his buttocks with a fan. Rihanna did not take her eyes off her husband. She was overcome with rage. She seemed to have already realized the disgusting situation and had even come to terms with it. But there was no end to it. She cried out of frustration. She saw her lawful husband approach Lisbeth, how she leaned her head against his shoulder, how he lustfully took her buttock with his hand. Our heroine knew that her husband's bad deeds were not limited to bribes. She couldn't understand why she hadn't noticed before that he was no different from the others. The girl went outside. She was in tears. Lost in thought, she did not notice how the brown-eyed brunette was already hurrying towards her. He suggested that she wipe her face from tears. The young man was good-looking. His clothes said who their owner was. Alexander Esteraz was embroidered on a personalized scarf. Our heroine bowed in a curtsy. She politely said the words of greeting. I, Rihanna Royd, greet the son of Esterasia, His Majesty the Emperor. Alexander expressed out loud his assumption that Countess Royd was in front of him. He asked why she was crying on such a beautiful day. The girl modestly replied that she just had dust in her eyes. Hearing the standard excuse, the emperor raised his eyebrows in displeasure. In the angry tone of the ruler, he suggested that the girl dared to lie to the emperor. Rihanna meekly replied that the reason for her tears was personal, and she would prefer not to burden His Majesty with women's empty worries. She asked to be forgiven for her rudeness, that she interrupted His Majesty's walk. She asked permission to return to the house. Her skirts rustled. She hastened to leave the emperor's sight. He looked after her for a long time, deep in thought. A lady in uniform approached His Majesty. She clarified who it was that had just been next to him. Isn't it Madame Royd? He said that she was crying. The girl was surprised. I asked the reason for her sadness. She assumed it was out of happiness that her husband became a civil servant. But Alexander was not sure about that. For some reason, Alexander Esteraz was sure that they would meet again soon. There must be a reason for him to return the scarf. Rihanna preened herself in front of the mirror. I wore jewelry. The maid Margaret was always nearby. Rihanna told her about the appointment of her husband, also adding on his own behalf that he most likely gave a bribe. The maid was amazed at her mistress's assumption. The girl continued to reason out loud, that he used funds from the savings of the Royd house, or he embezzled money from the Norden Hotel. The maid was amazed at this suggestion. Rihanna said that in the second case, she and her father could be involved in a scam, and they need to be very careful. The lady asked Margaret to tell her if she noticed anything strange in George's room while cleaning. She herself was going to carefully study the hotel's financial statements. The maid promised to carry out exactly the mistress's order. She also reminded whether Margaret had prepared this. She answered in the affirmative. There was a knock on the room. The conspirators fell silent. The door opened. Another maid entered. She brought a cup of drink to the lady. She said that she added kale, spinach, oranges, and strawberries. I asked her to drink it before bed. The girl thanked her for your concern. She began to drink the drink she brought. She said she was a little bitter, coughing slightly. The maid claimed that she probably added a lot of kale. Here our heroine began to feel unwell. She missed the cup and it broke with a crash. The maids began to worry about their mistress. Margaret supported her by the shoulders. Another was amazed and asked if everything was okay with her. The girl assured that she was fine. I just suddenly got a headache. Having migraines lately. The ladies are intensifying. Another suggested calling the family doctor. Rihanna said she doesn't need a doctor. That last time the doctor said she was fine. That if she rests, everything should go away. She asked Margaret not to worry so much. That it's just a migraine. The faithful servant did not agree. She noticed that headaches were appearing more and more often. The girl claimed that the family doctor conducted a full examination, and I still didn't find anything. She assured the maids that she would soon feel better. The maid asked Mrs. Tell her if the pain doesn't go away, and call her immediately if something happens. The door closed. Walking steps were heard. Rihanna was in bed. Margaret was next to her. Rihanna asked the maid to find her a doctor, but she asked that this appeal be kept secret from the Royd servants. The city was located in a lowland between the hills. The tops of the chapels and towers stood out against the blue sky. A sunbeam played on the roofs of the houses. In one of the houses in the city center, not far from the main square, there is the house of a famous doctor in the area. Rihanna decided to go to the doctor under the name of her faithful servant. Today, 2 ladies appeared on his doorstep. Their faces were covered. The doctor knew one of them. He greeted Miss Margaret Sand. The doctor specified that his patient was suffering from severe migraines, and there are no periods for 2 months. He asked whether the patient was married. She answered in the affirmative, but she assured that she was not pregnant. She had not had sexual intercourse for a long time. She said she would pay well. After all, money is not a problem for her. She asked to carry out all the necessary examinations to find out the cause of her painful condition. The ladies were returning home by carriage. Margaret wondered aloud at the suggestion that the family doctor could have altered the results of the madam's examination. Rihanna replied that this could be so. After all, that doctor works for the Royd house. Now that she knew about her husband's betrayal, she stopped trusting either of them. The maid saw tears in the mistress's eyes. She took her hands. The maid sincerely wanted to support and help her young mistress. Our heroine returned to the estate. The carriage door was opened. The maid helped the lady out of the carriage. The coachman hurriedly drove the horses. Margaret was surprised. What was Lord Knighton doing at the hotel? Rihanna suggested that he wants to get married. The maid was surprised. After all, 4 years have passed since he and Kay Isbet broke up. Mistress made the assumption that they could start a new relationship. The sisters were sitting in the garden and drinking tea with sweets. More precisely, Elizabeth drank tea, and Rihanna was reading a book. The youngest asked if she was sick. She heard that Rihanna visited the doctor today. She clarified that she was still not feeling well. Rihanna was amazed how she found out about the trip. Lisbeth said she heard from Margaret. When they walked together, Rihanna knew that her maid was definitely not telling anything. Then a shadow of suspicion fell on the coachman. The sister continued her questions. She asked why she went to the doctor without telling her. She asked if she was healthy. Rihanna continued to push back. She told her sister that she accompanied Margaret. She just didn't want to let her go alone. Her last argument was that she could not invite the Royd healer for the sake of her maid. Lisbeth swallowed her sister's lies. Rihanna responded that the family doctor claimed that she had no health problems, that my sister has nothing to worry about. Rihanna herself could barely contain her emotions. Such made concern about her health. Why did it happen? Her hands trembled with resentment and anger. Our heroine realized that the coachman was secretly communicating with Lisbeth. She needed to find another carriage without anyone knowing, with a coachman who knows how to keep secrets. Margaret accepted her mistress's orders. She said that she understood everything and would try to help find it. Rihanna also asked her to make sure that their doctor would keep his mouth shut, promised to pay him more than he was offered before. She wanted to be calm. George dressed in formal clothes. Today I also wore thin white gloves. The man smiled at himself, his wife, and the whole world. He said he was glad. After all, today was his first day at work. All his life he dreamed of becoming an official, like his father and grandfather. Rihanna said that she knew very well about his dream. She helped her husband knit a tie. He asked her not to tie it so tightly, that he can't breathe like that. The girl apologized, smiling sweetly. She justified herself that she was so excited that she simply did not calculate her strength. Earl Royd was introduced to the team. They said that he would work with them. George looked great and felt quite confident. His colleagues greeted him politely. One said that the Duke of McDonald personally recommended George, and he's looking forward to them working together. He was given a basket of flowers. He said that Madame had sent him a gift. He believed that she was exaggerating the importance of his first day at work. There was also a letter in the basket. After reading it, George thought about it. His colleague asked if there was any problem. He replied that it was just a letter from his wife, that it really touched his feelings. The men said that his marriage was truly happy, since he was so touched and surprised by her letter. In fact, George had no idea who that basket was from. The letter briefly wrote, "I know all your secrets." The man expressed fear and confusion. Lisbeth asked in surprise who this letter could be from. He said he had no idea. He said that today they brought him a huge basket of flowers, and there lay this strange letter. George said that someone was threatening him. He asked Lisbeth what he should do now. He held her tightly by the forearms. The girl tore his hands away from her forearms. She said that first he should calm down. The man was at a loss as to what had become known: his relationship with Lisbeth, or bribing the Duke for a position in the Ministry of Finance, or... He received an impressive slap in the face. The girl asked him to come to his senses. George rubbed his cheek. She was still burning from the slap from his lover. The man reached out to the girl. She hugged him by the shoulders. He whimpered like a little child, unable to contain the emotions overwhelming him. George was shaking all over. He asked himself and Lisbeth what kind of devil could do this to him. The couple was sitting on the sofa. He sat straight with his legs. The girl stroked him behind the ear soothingly. The man assumed that someone might have spoken to the Duke before him. Lisbeth spoke in a soothing tone. That it's just a small threat, that they won't do anything without evidence, and he shouldn't be afraid on this score. The girl held his cheeks with her hands. She convincingly asked him to trust her. There were tears in his eyes. The green-eyed girl assured that no one could harm them. Having already calmed down, he assented in the affirmative. He said that he would only trust her. Margaret helped her mistress take care of herself. She was sitting near the balcony in a transparent peignoir, Mrs. Rihanna in everything. She specified when she should send the next gift. Madame said that frequent threats would not lead to anything good. She suggested sending little by little and infrequently. She wanted to give the traitor and traitor a little time to be nervous. Let them languish in anticipation of her next trick. Rihanna promised that from now on they will sink deeper and deeper into the pool of despair. She certainly promised to help them with this in everything. The maid brought the lady a letter. She said it came from the palace. He was sent from the main residence. The message said that the handkerchief should be returned to its owner. The emperor himself invited them to the palace with this letter. Rihanna suddenly remembered that moment, when she was all in tears, and the emperor simply wanted to console her by offering her his handkerchief. The palace greeted the girl in all its splendor. Chapel, towers, luxurious courtyard, swimming pool. Everything delighted the eye. In the hall where she was taken, a table was set. Excellent red wine was poured into the glass. The girl sat opposite the emperor himself. He ceremoniously wiped his face, taking a short pause. He asked Madame Reut, "Does she know why he called her here?" She said that obviously the reason was not only that handkerchief. The emperor and Rihanna were served at table by well-trained and almost invisible servants. They were all dressed in the same uniform. The owner of the palace, after taking a few sips of wine, continued the conversation with his invited guest. The girl was already beginning to be at a loss. She said that regarding taxes, she pays them in good faith every year. The emperor supported the conversation about the tax investigation. He asked if there were any problems with the Norden's financial management. Rihanna was horrified just by the thought of what George was doing. She tensed her face and clutched the hem of her dress with her fingers. The girl assured the emperor, swore to God that she had never done anything shameful. The owner of the castle told the girl that he knew little about her. But not everything in this world can be seen. Our heroine began to guess. As she suspected, George embezzles the hotel's money, and it seems that the emperor suspects him of bribery. It turned out that the reason for calling the girl was different. She guessed that his lordship wanted to know if she had anything to do with all this dirt. The girl assured the emperor. What if something unacceptable happened behind her back? Even if her relatives or her husband's family were involved. She will find the culprits, and they will receive the punishment they deserve. After all, nothing is more important to her than the Norden Hotel. The girl decided to change the subject. She assured the emperor that she could not return the scarf to him now, and she asked to be forgiven for her rudeness in causing him trouble over such a trifle. The owner of the castle said that everything was fine. After all, they were able to meet and have dinner together, that he just wanted to talk to her. Evening gave way to nighttime. The moon over the castle was clouded with haze. The stars, like thousands of distant suns, illuminated the emperor's castle. The ruler was not alone in his office. The lady asked him if he was acting too risky. After all, if Mrs. Reut is in cahoots with the count, she gets rid of the evidence by returning home. He was confident in the girl's honesty. Today at dinner he saw her sincerity and believed every word she said. The emperor was thinking. It turned out that the count not only bought his position with dirty money. This guy was involved in some other dirty dealings. He expressed his opinion out loud, that in Mrs. Reut's place he would have handed Earl Reut over to justice, or to the emperor in person. Otherwise, he promised not to leave the Norden Hotel alone. Upon arrival home, Rihanna went to her husband's office. George was sitting in the company of Lisbeth. She expressed her surprise that the two of them were here together. Lisbeth replied that George wanted to ask her something. He nodded affirmatively in response. The man said that he wanted to know Lisbeth's opinion on whether the dress he had previously ordered would suit his wife, the very thing he was preparing to give for their anniversary. Our heroine picked up the gorgeous dress that had just been given to her. Her husband asked her if she liked it. Lisbeth interjected her approving opinion about the dress. The youngest said that the dress was exactly her sister's taste. Rihanna smiled and thanked her husband. Rihanna retired to her room. With the help of sharp tailor's scissors, she took out her negative emotions on a gift from her cheating husband. The faithful maid asked her mistress why she got rid of such a beautiful outfit. Rihanna asked her to burn it. Margaret did not agree with how her mistress dealt with the expensive gift, but she didn't dare disobey. She burned the scraps in the fireplace. The maid was taking out a box of linen from the mistress's room. Rihanna, meanwhile, watched the remains of her dress burn out. She said as if to herself that His Majesty knew about George's waste. This is why he invited her to the palace today. He also asked if she was involved in her husband's scams, or it's happening behind her back. Margaret wondered why the emperor told her mistress everything. And after all, she can tell her husband everything. Rihanna looked out the night window for a long time. She thought about what had happened. Cooperation was possible. The girl made a decision for herself. If she wants to protect the Nordens Hotel, she will need to hand over to His Majesty evidence of the conspiracy between her husband and the Duke of Macdonald. The maid realized that there would be no turning back. She will have to betray the master. Mrs. Rihanna asks her about it. Mistress explained to the girl that if you protect George, the hotel will be destroyed. It was necessary to find evidence of her husband's embezzlement. The fire in the fireplace was burning out. The remains of the dress in it were burning out. Rihanna reminded the maid to keep an eye on George's room. She took it upon herself to look after the hotel. Rihanna was sitting with another older lady. They drank tea and exchanged social news. The lady solemnly announced the good news. Her daughter was getting married. Congratulations and enthusiastic exclamations on this occasion poured in. She said that the wedding is in a month. She invited me to a celebration of the newlyweds' marriage. However, she clarified that she was inviting only her and her husband. She said she didn't want to see her little sister. The lady apologized. I asked her to understand that she has nothing against Lisbeth. However, she noticed the way the men looked at her. Rihanna said Madame Schubalt had nothing to worry about. Margaret weighed what she heard. It turned out that the Schubalt's daughter was marrying the son of the Nivet family. That groom was handsome, but extremely reserved. His thoughts were closed from everyone. Rihanna told the maid that it was a normal wedding. The girl agreed. After all, a lot of time has passed. The lady noticed that there were more important things to do. The results of the medical examination were expected to arrive soon. The maid suggested going to the doctor in the evening to avoid unwanted attention from curious people. Rihanna agreed that the idea was good enough. The mistress and the maid went to the stables. There she encountered the son of the Nivet family. He asked if she was hurt. When he found out, he called me by name. The girl didn't understand. Why, of all the possible options, did she face this man now? Out loud, she only briefly congratulated her on her marriage. The man held her hand and asked her to wait. He wanted to talk to her for a minute. Table set for tea with sweet treats. Rihanna and her interlocutor took a pause for the sake of decency. She clarified what he wanted to talk to her about. The girl said that she had no reason to talk to someone who was getting married soon. She stared into her cup of tea. A hint of sadness appeared on her face. He said that she had not changed at all. And he said that she could do as she saw fit. Then he asked to be allowed not to change anything. The man wanted to tell her something before the wedding. I was also going to find out how she was doing. He said that from that day they never spoke face to face. Rihanna was surprised. Wasn't it strange for two houses to meet after a cancelled engagement? The man said that the real reason for breaking off the engagement with her sister was different. That he's not even sure. I could only guess. He said that out of the blue he was informed about the termination of the engagement, and soon her marriage was announced. The man claimed that it was Lisbeth. When she found out about her sister's wedding, she suddenly changed her mind and asked to break up. And when he refused, she began to pester me in every possible way. Lisbeth wrote in blood, forcing him to agree to the termination. She threatened to make his life hell if they got married. Rihanna certainly expected this. But until now I didn't know about her real identity. The man clarified that his sister lives with Rihanna and her husband. He asked if his interlocutor had noticed anything unusual. Rihanna asked to clarify what exactly. The interlocutor drew her attention to the fact that her sister imitates her in everything. The girl had never thought about this before. He asked if Rihanna thought it was suspicious. And to be honest, she was surprised then. Rihanna fell in love with Mr. Nivet at first sight at the ball. Lisbeth asked the eldest if she liked him, and then the younger one left him as soon as she heard about the older one's marriage. Because I lost interest. Because he and Rihanna no longer had a chance. Rihanna asked what he was trying to tell her. He said that the younger one demanded an engagement when she liked him. However, it was no longer needed when Rihanna married another man. He asked his interlocutor to be careful. She especially had to beware of her younger sister. The girl believed that Lisbeth was not okay, and she should have listened to the advice before her sister stuck a knife in her back. The sisters were sitting in the dining room having lunch. Rihanna sighed to herself. The younger one asked what her sister's thoughts were. The girl replied that a lot happened today. Lisbeth wondered out loud that something funny had happened at Lady Gravis's house. Rihanna denied the funny incident, but she said that she received an invitation to the wedding. My sister was surprised and asked which one it was. The girl clarified that it was the Nevetsov's son who was getting married, and Lady Shubalt only invited Rihanna and George. Rihanna saw the change in her sister's face. She asked if everything was okay with her. She assured that everything was in the past. The eldest was interested in why Liz broke up with that man that time. But my sister made an excuse that they simply didn't get along in character. Lisbeth said that she fell in love at first sight and even got engaged. But marriage is too much responsibility, and you need to be very careful in your choice. Rihanna agreed with her sister. But she said that, however, everyone finds a couple and gets married, because they are getting older, and she too. Lisbeth replied that she knew all this, and she promised to look for a groom. She said that she still liked living with her sister. She began to fidget in her chair. The girl said that she was not in a hurry to get married because she did not want to lose her sister. She asked if she was trying to marry her off quickly because she simply didn't want to live with her. Rihanna asked her sister not to say anything stupid. She leaned forward for a hug and she said that she loved her very much. Lisbeth said she remembered everything. When she was abandoned, Rihanna took in her crazy sister, although the eldest was on her honeymoon at the time. That's when she realized how much her older sister loved her. She said that they were not just sisters but twins, and that's why she loves her, the eldest, so much. The girl said that there was more than affection between them. The eldest took her hand. She answered that she cared. Lisbeth admitted that she also loved her sister very much, and she started hugging her. Rihanna was still tense. Our heroine noticed an expensive piece of jewelry on her sister's neck. She was wary of where the expensive new thing came from. The maid came in. She said that the gentleman had returned. George came in. Our heroine has already stopped her attempts. Lisbeth was amazed at the sight of George. She asked what he was doing to look like that now. The man smiled. An expensive stone was pinned on his neck. Rihanna guessed that her husband must have been drinking in the company of people from the Treasury Department. Lisbeth offered to help him. But George was in a hurry to hug his wife. He said he was very happy. She understood that he just drank a lot. Rihanna said that looking at his unbridled joy, her soul became warmer. In the morning, George woke up feeling unwell. Lisbeth was already waiting for him nearby. He was surprised how she got here, into his room. The girl replied that everything was fine. Her sister asked to bring him as soon as he woke up. His wife herself prepared onion soup for a hangover. She asked him to get up quickly. Otherwise, my sister might have some suspicions. The man asked how much longer they would live like this. Lisbeth asked to be patient a little longer. She said that they had almost reached their goal. George ate onion soup, carefully prepared by his wife. Rihanna asked him to invite his colleagues to their home, so they can have lunch together. His wife said that all this time she was overly indifferent to his new job, and it would be great to show them what he has achieved, to earn authority in their eyes. George loudly put his spoon aside. He said that he should only speak now, but she did not cope well with the duties of his wife. Rihanna said she was sorry, and she promised to do her best. He said that there is no need to make excuses. I just asked him to try harder. Rihanna said he could look forward to it. In 2 weeks, everything will be ready. The man said that he was glad to finally find mutual understanding with her. 2 weeks after the event described above, our sisters and George were sitting at the table. Rihanna suddenly started bleeding from her nose. George became alarmed. I asked my wife if she was okay. The girl assured that she was just a little tired. Lisbeth came to her sister's aid. She said it was all about hotel management. Work takes too much energy from my sister, that she should rest more. The doctor gave Rihanna a 1-year sentence, that if nothing is changed, Madame will live no more than a year. Rihanna cried from the unexpected news. She asked for details. I wanted to know everything. She was shaking all over. It looked like Rihanna was taking small amounts of poison regularly over a long period of time. Her headaches and amenorrhea are early signs, but soon hemoptysis, fainting, weight loss, and signs of insanity will begin. The doctor said that as a result, the girl would be paralyzed and die a short time later. Rihanna had such suspicions before. He said that the patient should stop taking the poison. I asked if she had any idea where he might be kept. Our heroine understood that this could not be done without the support and awareness of the servants. It turned out that Elizabeth was planning to kill her, to become the mistress of the Royd family herself. Rihanna wondered. Since when has she been bullied? Had she really been given a little poison during her 5 years of marriage? And it turned out that each of those people wanted her dead. The girl recalled how she and her sister played as children, how she dated a man, how happy and carefree she was. Margaret held Mrs. That weak woman was reclining on the floor in the doctor's office. The maid asked Madame to come to her senses. Our heroine was lying in a hospital bed. Her faithful maid Margaret sat nearby. The doctor promised to make an antidote, that even when poison enters the girl's body every day, taking medication will help her recover. Rihanna was glad that she would not die. And then they announced that their plans needed to be changed. She said that the plan to marry Lisbeth was too naive, and now she wasn't intends to spare her. Now Rihanna was going to leave her sister by her side, to personally watch as my sister's life slowly turns into hell. And when Lisbeth experiences the same unbearable pain, our heroine promised to kill her in the most painful way. Mistress Margaret asked if she was afraid to help her with all this, that if she refuses now, she will simply let her go. Margaret replied that she wanted to serve the kind and strong Mrs. Everything she could only dream of. She assured the hostess. Whatever her decision, she vowed to stay with her until the very end. Our heroine cried, moved. She did not expect such affection from her maid. The girls, out of excess of emotion, hugged each other as a sign of their union. Crying, Rihanna spoke words of revelation, that despite the betrayal of all those people, she thinks that God has not yet abandoned her to the mercy of fate. Margaret asked the lady not to cry. She told her to be strong, so that everyone who betrayed her would repent of their sins against her. Rihanna realized the truth of her maid's words. They decided that no one in the house should suspect anything, and they agreed to behave as if nothing had happened. The sisters and George were sitting at the dining table. Lisbeth was surprised that her sister no longer sought to marry her off. Rihanna said that she put too much pressure on her sister. She admitted that very little time had passed since the sisters' last separation. George joined in her words. He claimed that she had been making Lisbeth quite nervous lately. He said that if you think carefully, there is no need to rush into marriage, because it's never too late to meet your person. Rihanna agreed with her husband's opinion. Lisbeth thanked her sister, smiling sweetly. Lisbeth said that if she would live with them, she wants to finally babysit their child. After all, what could be better? Rihanna did not understand why her sister insisted on having a child. Was she going to kill him with her? She said she wanted that too. But I thought that I also wanted to see my sister and us near death. The man asked if he had missed anything. The girl said that he looked simply irresistible. He thanked. He promised that they would see each other later. Margaret was already waiting for her mistress. Rihanna took out the symbol of the Treasury Department from her sleeve and put it in the envelope. The maid recognized the master's jewel. Rihanna asked her to go to the department and give this to George. The man thanked the maid. He asked Margaret to tell Rihanna upon his return that he would be late. She suggested out loud that he had some problems, but he considered it necessary to report to the maid. He just asked me to tell his wife that he had business to do. Margaret looked around. As a rule, there should be a service area nearby. She found him. She pushed the door. Rihanna asked her to find out what her husband was doing, especially why he began to linger and drink. In the maid's restroom, you could find out all the local gossip. There was a real hive there. Margaret heard what she needed. It turned out that Count Royd clearly did not please the Marquis in some way. Our heroine was overwhelmed by the information received, which her faithful maid Margaret found out. She knew that the Marquis Allegory Perkinson belonged to a noble family, famous for the best scientists. The lady asked Margaret to do something else. She spoke the rest into her ear. Rihanna announced that tonight's dinner should be interesting. Footsteps were heard along the stone path of the estate. George walked holding onto the wall. He held an open bottle in his hand. It was clearly obvious that he was drunk. Papers flew into his face. The Marquis was beside himself with anger. He was ready for a rash act. The boss asked the man, how could he manage the hotel if he is not even able to properly perform a simple task? He was considered a special newcomer after all. The Marquis reproached himself. He noticed that the workers recommended by McDonnell were not particularly smart. George was collecting papers on the floor. Her husband was helped by servants to the sofa. Rihanna asked how much he drank today, and what happened in the Imperial Palace. He told his wife not to pay attention, that she still wouldn't understand even if he told her everything. George said that the world of men is too complex to understand, and women are too stupid to whine to him. Rihanna changed the subject. She told her husband that she had found a very interesting book. It appears to have been written by an ancestor of the Marquis of Perkinson. The man jumped up as if scalded. I asked her to repeat what she said. Rihanna smilingly asked if George knew the Marquis. She said that he was very lucky with his boss. The Marquis is from a very famous family. The girl offered to leave him this book, so he can read it later when he wants. She claimed that after reading it, he would respect his boss even more. Left alone, George sat down. He looked for a long time at the book that his wife left on the table. He personified the Marquis himself in this book. The man threw the book forcefully onto the floor. Lisbeth asked Rihanna how her son-in-law was. The sister replied that he was already asleep. Looks like he worked a lot and was damn tired from the day. The younger one said that the boss was bullying George. She said that she was too indifferent to her husband. Rihanna asked how she knew about her boss's bad attitude towards her husband. My sister said she just thought so. The younger one added that she knew that people usually have a hard time working because of their tyrant bosses. She advised her sister to be more careful. George wasn't feeling well. He had a severe headache. She felt like she was filled with lead. It was lunchtime. He finally had time to rest. He suddenly saw his wife. She was accompanied by 2 maids. They were carrying boxes. He asked why she came. After all, he works here. The girl said that she had prepared something for his colleagues, who work hard for the benefit of the imperial family and their state. Rihanna said that she tried her best and put her soul into her cooking. She apologized that something might be missing. She asked me to accept her sincerity. George's colleagues enjoyed sampling the fresh homemade cakes that the girl had brought. George asked her why she suddenly decided to do this. She said that he had been working so hard these past days. That's why she wanted to remind him to rest more. The man was touched. He apologized that it was time for him to get to work. The girl wished him a good day at work. George's colleagues were pleased. The men were happily discussing something in a small group. Rihanna heard a clicking sound. The Emperor appeared from the front door. Rihanna was so worried that she wouldn't be able to meet him. His lordship asked what brought Countess Royd here. The man smiled. He was glad to see the girl. She said that she went to the Ministry of Finance. The Emperor clarified that she came to the office to see her husband. She swallowed nervously. The girl suggested that his lordship had ears everywhere. He asked her point blank if she loved her husband. Rihanna admitted that she was just fulfilling her duties, as befits a decent wife. The young emperor asked, have her close people ever betrayed her? She wondered why he asked such a question to her. Hands involuntarily clenched into fists. He continued his questions. He was interested. If betrayal happens, what will she do in response? The girl assured that in this case she would definitely take revenge on the traitor. That to the same extent as she suffered or more. The emperor liked the girl's thinking like this, and he hoped that it would not change over time and with changing circumstances. He said out loud that he liked her confident look. He mentally admired this fragile but strong woman. Rihanna timidly asked the emperor for permission to ask him a personal question. He suggested trying to guess. Did his close people betray him? Yes, he was betrayed many times. Rihanna asked how he reacted to the betrayal. His lordship told her not to plan to hear about his revenge. He couldn't do that then. That man was already dead. The girl was surprised by this. She expressed her hope that this would not happen again. The emperor joined in with her wishes addressed to him. He asked the girl to take care of herself. They said goodbye. The servant opened the door for his lordship, visiting them on their day off. They responded by expressing their gratitude for the invitation. They admired the magnificent decoration of the mansion. The owner proudly said that everything was thanks to the efforts of his wife. She was the one who looked after the hotel. One lady asked in surprise why she had a different appetizer than what was brought to the other guests. She resented that. George shouted authoritatively at his wife. How dare she show such disrespect to his guest? But the girl said, smiling, that she found out that the lady was living a vegan lifestyle. Therefore, she asked me to prepare a different dish for her personally. The lady changed her anger to mercy. Now she was delighted with Countess Royd. She appreciated her attentiveness to her. Rihanna said it was nothing. Rihanna assured that everyone in high society knows that she is a vegan. George was surprised twice. Your ignorance about this fact, and the existence of such a fact in principle. The man began to praise his wife in front of the guests, that she can do everything, from home care to hotel management. The girl claimed that he was exaggerating everything about her. George noticed that everyone was now looking at his wife with admiration. He was pricked with envy. After all, he is the owner of the estate. He should be the center of attention today. The servant reported to the owner that another guest had arrived. George was surprised. Who came late? He was sure that all the invited people were at the table. The host of the evening was surprised. The Marquis appeared. He said he was late. He asked Countess Royd for forgiveness for this. He claimed that he was guilty. The girl claimed that there was nothing wrong. She thought that the Marquis would not come. So they started lunch. She verbally expressed her regret. The guest argued that there was no need to apologize. After all, he was late after all. The Countess pulled out a chair for him. I asked the guest to sit down. George was beside himself. He was ready to say some nasty things. Why did she invite a person he disliked to dinner? The man smiled and greeted the Marquis. He stated that he was not notified that he was invited. The distinguished guest asked what was wrong with that. Why shouldn't he come? George assured him that of course not. That's not what he meant. The owner of the mansion was trembling. He said he didn't think so, that such a busy person could visit them. The Marquis clarified that this is why he did not invite him. George asked him to forgive him. The distinguished guest spoke. What if he had not accidentally met his wife when she was in the department? Apparently, he was the only one who didn't know what was happening. Then George guessed that Rihanna personally invited the Marquis to a dinner party that day when she brought the baked goods. The man thought that he just needed to take food, so that Rihanna does not walk around the department, and his wife sat with shining eyes. The Marquis asked George why he looked so upset. He suggested that he had deliberately not invited him. The owner of the mansion looked like an ashamed schoolboy. He said that he would not dare to be so rude and disrespectful to his boss. George's boss wouldn't let him go. He told him directly that he had no shame or conscience, but he couldn't believe that he could be so rude. George is already pretty tired of this beating. Just like at school with the director proofreading comments. The vegan lady praised the desserts. She claimed that they were incredibly tasty. I especially praised the creme brulee. The owner of the mansion thanked for the praise. He said that he was pleased to hear this. He was finally about to breathe a sigh of relief. But Rihanna offered to tour the estate. George said that perhaps their guests were already tired, but the girl insisted on viewing their collection in the living room. The guests were surprised by this proposal from the owner of the mansion. The guests entered the spacious living room. They were surprised by the many books in Countess Rihanna Royd's collection. The girl said that she liked collecting valuable books and give them to guests when they arrive. Of course, if they want it and the book suits their taste. Those invited claimed that the Countess not only had an excellent sense of style, that her hobby befits a true noblewoman. One asked if she could take one book for herself. The guests scattered to view the collection, some just for fun, and others chose a book as a gift from the owner of the mansion. The Marquis drew attention to one book. She stood unevenly. It was obvious that she had recently been taken to read. The nobleman realized that this book was written by his late father. He admitted to himself that he did not expect to see her here. The Marquis opened the book and began to read it. The guests asked what was happening to him. Is everything so with him? The guests began to look over the Marquis's shoulder. The Marquis asked if this was Count Reuter's handwriting. George was no less surprised. The Marquis threw a book at the owner of the estate. The man could not understand the reasons for his guest's anger. George picked up the book. He turned it around and was horrified. On its page there were written derogatory phrases about the book, about its late author and his ego. The man thought it was all because of alcohol. He clearly remembered his wife bringing him a book. But I didn't remember exactly what happened next. The man assured the Marquis that there had been a misunderstanding. The Marquis was furious. He said that he recognized his handwriting. The Marquis accused George of disrespect. He said that he knew about his disrespect for him, but he will not allow the memory of his father to be desecrated. It was an act against his entire Perkinson family. The guest was screaming loudly. He asked how a simple employee could insult his father, the former prime minister. He told him not to dream of a sweet life in the treasury. George knelt before the Marquis. He spoke words of regret. I asked him to forgive me for the last time. He grabbed his clothes with his hand. The Marquis pulled away from the Duke's grip. He said that he did not want to stay here a minute longer. The noble guest was in a hurry to leave the Royd mansion. The rest of the guests were shocked by the incident. They said that it was time for them to leave and that they did not need to be accompanied. George was killed by the incident. Rihanna, worried about her husband, asked if he was okay. He yelled at her. I asked what she thought. He said that his career was now over. He blamed his wife for everything that happened, that she brought that book here. George was on his knees facing the floor. Rihanna sat down stroking his head. End? She didn't agree that it had to end this way. She believed that it could not end so simply. She spoke soothing words to her husband. She assured him that this was not the end, that he has her. He hugged his wife. He asked me to forgive his bad character. He asked her for support. He said that he was the only one left. His wife tenderly spoke words of comfort to him. She convinced her that she was capable of anything for his sake. Our heroine was taking a bath. A faithful servant immersed red rose flowers in the water. She did not tear one of the flowers from the stem. Presented Mrs. _. Margaret congratulated her. She said that she was happy to see her in a good mood after a long time. Rihanna promised that this was just the beginning. She smelled the rose flower, and then she sharply crushed it with her hand. She promised that the most interesting things were yet to come. George stood in front of the ministry door. He wasn't sure he could. Rihanna convinced him that a good person would apologize and ask for forgiveness. She convinced him that everything should go smoothly, and he agreed with her. He convinced himself that he was still young, and soon everything will be completely forgotten. When George appeared in the team, everyone looked at him disapprovingly. His hands were wet and trembling. He convinced himself that he could work. Rihanna was checking the hotel accounts. It turned out that George had gone quite far. It turned out that he was embezzling the hotel's funds. She asked the employee to report to her all the information on the documents, and she asked me to hide everything safely. The employee was against it. Rihanna said that she is not trying to hide her husband's crimes. Our heroine wanted to completely break George. Therefore, she needed to wait for the right moment to do this. The employee said that secrecy also has a limit, but Rihanna insisted there was no need to worry about it. She asked me to just do what she says. The man nervously entered the boss's door. He spoke with a bit of a stutter. He said that he had brought a report on the income and expenses of the Treasury Department for the last quarter. George still wanted to say something, but the Marquis threw the papers he had brought at his feet. He swore that this was some kind of scribbling and not a report. George collected the scattered papers on the floor. He asked the Marquis to tell him where exactly he had made a mistake. He asked if he wanted to understand his mistake. The Marquis stepped on the papers on the floor. He asked whether such an answer was enough for George. The Duke began to shout that the Marquis was crossing all boundaries. What if he made a mistake? He asked me to help him fix it. I asked if this wasn't the responsibility of bosses. The Marquis asked George, approaching him dangerously. Does he consider him his boss? The man made excuses that there was a misunderstanding. The boss exploded. He started screaming. He screamed to the devil to take him. The Marquis asked how he dared to write those vile words in his late father's book. George asked him for forgiveness. The boss warned him not to continue making excuses, but to get out immediately. Get out of the ministry. Lisbeth walked through the mansion, humming. George sat thoughtfully at the dinner table. The girl approached him with her light gait. She asked why he was home so early. The man was silent, frowning. The girl lightly touched him with her foot. She asked for an answer to her question. George replied that the Marquis Parkinson was clearly crazy, and it is simply impossible to work with him. He said that all that remained was to write a letter of resignation. Let him be without work, but he can still enjoy life. Lisbeth was amazed by what she heard. The man asked where she was in the morning. I assumed it was at some meeting. She hesitated to answer. Rihanna walked in and interrupted their conversation. She heard snippets of conversation. She asked how she should understand this. What kind of dismissal is her husband talking about? George spoke furiously. That Perkinson trampled on his report. He cooked for 3 days. He also shouted for no reason. The man slammed his fist on the table. He screamed at the top of his lungs that he would never return there again. because he has had enough of these bullying and humiliations. Rihanna calmly clarified with her husband that he's not going to work anymore. He said that in this case he could return to work at the hotel. The girl asked her husband, "What will people think of him if he gives up everything at once like that? Not only did he insult the Marquis, so I also managed to quarrel with him." George was already more calmly asking his wife that maybe he was wrong. She answered him that the problem was the loss of such a desirable job for him. The man said that everyone was whispering behind his back, that from his wife's words he realized that he should have avoided this. Rihanna said that he may have become a topic of gossip for the rest of his life, but she insisted that her husband simply had to beg for forgiveness from the Marquis, maybe even kneeling. George got angry again. The man said that he was a nobleman, head of the Royd family, that yesterday he already bowed his head in front of people. He said he couldn't. I asked who in their right mind would agree to undergo such humiliation. George left, slamming the door. Lisbeth asked her sister how she was feeling. Rihanna clenched her fists but didn't show it. My sister said that her eldest looked tired. She asked if she had any pain in her chest. She said she was worried about her. That one looks tired. Rihanna responded with gratitude for the concern, that she was really a little tired of taking care of hotel guests. The youngest assured that health is more important. Lisbeth also said that she was very worried about George, that he is so vulnerable. She advised me not to ask him to humiliate himself like that. The eldest said that the scales were temporary humiliation or a high position, that he probably doesn't really want to live at his wife's expense for the rest of his life. Lisbeth thought for a while about the words her sister had said, and when they were alone with George, she advised me to listen to my wife's words. George was simply furious. The man said that he did not expect such advice from her. To kneel and beg for forgiveness was beyond his dignity. He accused her of not thinking about his feelings. The girl said that after his dismissal it would be difficult for him to find another promising job. The man agreed with these arguments. She said that she wanted to become the wife of an outstanding man, not a coward. She kissed him and continued to gently whisper something in his ear. She said that she believed in him. Our heroine was sitting in the living room on the sofa and drinking a drink. The maid told her that the Count had gone to work. Everyone at the ministry was gossiping about Earl Royden, and he himself was on his knees begging for forgiveness from the Marquis. The boss asked him to get up from his knees. He insisted that he would not atone for his sins this way. He said that he did not want to see his imaginary repentance. George said it was his fault. He asked for forgiveness and to give him a chance. He promised not to let him down and to justify the trust shown to him. Marquis said the problem is not just misconduct. He alleged that the subordinate did not even have the basic knowledge to perform the work of the ministry. He added that it was a shame for the ministry that such a fool had the opportunity to work here. Madame was playing chess with the maid. Margaret reasoned out loud, "Will the Marquis Perkinson forgive Mr. George?" Rihanna replied that she was sure, that he will beg for the Marquis's forgiveness, and it doesn't matter how long it takes him, and how he will be treated. She claimed that her husband would try to keep his position, and he will fall into despair if he loses his job. Rihanna reminded the maid that she was going to the doctor that evening. Margaret was surprised that the medicine ran out so quickly. The lady denied the need for a new medication. She said she wanted to check something. The doctor claimed that Madame's health had improved markedly since their last meeting. Rihanna said that she no longer suffers from headaches. The medicine helped. The doctor asked if anyone was interested in her health, and then he said that Sister Margaret Sand came yesterday. Rihanna asked if Margaret had a sister. She knew that the maid was the only child in the family. The doctor said that that person was worried about her, that her sister looks unwell and doesn't say anything. She also complained of headaches. Then she asked the doctor, "What about my sister?" Rihanna was worried about what the doctor's answer was. On the shelf there were many different vessels with medicines, poisons, and chemicals. The doctor asked Madame not to worry. He stated that information about patients is completely confidential, and no doctor has the right to disclose details of the patient's diagnosis and treatment, even to his relatives. He assured that he told her sister that his patient has a cold and needs to take medicine. Rihanna expressed the hope that the doctor would not tell anyone about her diagnosis in the future either. He confirmed that, of course. After all, this rule applied to all his patients and was not an exception. The girl briefly thanked the man for his decency and professional integrity. The man was dressed in a simple housecoat. He was nervous and covered his face with his hand. His sisters were sitting at the table with him. He said he took Rihanna's advice. He said that he begged the boss, stepping over his pride. He restrained himself as best he could. The man hit the table with his fist out of excess emotion. He said that no one can even imagine how much he endured, that all the employees saw his pathetic side. Rihanna clarified whether the Marquise had forgiven her husband, but he argued that this was very difficult to achieve, that the Marquis is an incredibly evil and cruel person, and no one gave him the right to humiliate him like that. He also threatened to take revenge on him at the next opportunity. He promised that one day the Marquis himself would kneel before him. The wife looked at her husband rejoicing. She clarified how he was going to take revenge on his boss. She claimed that she would really like to see, but I thought a different continuation, that she would like to see the look on her husband's face when he falls at her feet, begging for forgiveness. She was looking forward to this moment. The husband told Rihanna that she would soon see everything for herself, that everything will be according to his plan and desire. He asked if she believed in him, and touched her hand. Lisbeth looked at this scene of unexpected marital fidelity with secret thoughts. Birds were chirping in the garden near the mansion. The sky was clear and the weather was fine. Rihanna wore an elegant dress. She was accompanied by her husband in a suit. The butler bowed as a sign of respect and deference to the guests. He asked the countess to show the invitation. Rihanna quickly rummaged through her purse, but did not find the envelope that she had recently received with an invitation to the celebration. She was confused. After all, she probably remembered that she put it here. But she said that she seemed to have forgotten. The husband asked what they should do now. The butler was helpful and knew the girl, so he told her not to worry, that he would check her on the invite list and be back soon. Rihanna thanked, but I found it strange that the letter was not in my purse. She was pleased that despite the misunderstanding, everything worked out. The husband was annoyed with his wife. He asked her how she could forget such an important thing, called her crazy. She asked him not to get so angry over little things. Rihanna said that people still gossip about him, so she advised him better not to attract the attention of others. The butler reported that their invitation had been confirmed, and he asked them to come in for the celebration. The bride greeted those who entered. She was beautiful. Her blue eyes were highlighted by matching jewelry and a huge bow. The bride spoke polite words of greeting. Rihanna responded by welcoming Penelope Schubalt and congratulating her on her wedding. The beauty in a white dress politely and decorously thanked for the honor and time spent. Rihanna showered compliments on the hostess of the celebration, but then she was called from behind. "Sister!" The girl turned her head in amazement to the call and was extremely surprised by what she saw. Lisbeth stood in front of her. She was wearing a provocative red dress. Her eyes childishly, naively shone with some incomprehensible delight. The bride's mother was furious. She saw the uninvited guest and gritted her teeth, and the bride wondered why the girl came to the wedding. She knew that her chosen one broke up with Lisbeth 5 years ago. Rihanna attacked her sister. She asked what she was doing here. She answered as if nothing had happened, that she also wanted to celebrate the wedding. Then the eldest grabbed the brat tightly by the hand and dragged her out of the banquet hall. Lisbeth resisted and indignantly asked where she was taking her. Already in the garden of the estate, Rihanna released her rebellious sister from her clutches. She asked why her sister was so angry with her. She complained that she hurt her by rubbing her arm. The eldest asked how she entered without an invitation. Lisbeth replied that this became possible thanks to her. After all, Rihanna left something at home, and she took out an envelope with an invitation. Her eyes sparkled mischievously. The girl knew that her sister simply stole her invitation from her purse at home. The man called out Lisbeth's name. He was alarmed. He said he heard screams, and he was surprised by the girl's appearance at the celebration. And he asked Rihanna to explain to him what was happening here. The brat started complaining about her sister. He told George that she was being unfair to her, that she just wanted to give her sister an invitation she had forgotten at home. And with tears in her eyes, she complained that she roughly grabbed her by the arm and unceremoniously dragged her out of the hall in front of everyone. George told his wife that she should not treat her sister this way. It reminded her that Lisbeth was her only sister, and asked to be kinder to her. Rihanna asked her husband to take her sister away, and she herself was going to apologize to the Schubalts. The saboteur chuckled contentedly under her breath. George, already alone, asked the girl why she came here. She sighed languidly, and in a disappointed voice she asked why he was not happy to see her. George insisted that he was certainly happy, but everything just happened quite unexpectedly. Therefore, he was surprised by her appearance at the celebration, and Rihanna is probably confused too. Lisbeth claimed that she really wanted to see her sister's face at that moment. At the same time, her eyes sparkled. The man spoke to the girl, swallowing nervously. What may seem from the outside is that she does not love her sister. The girl replied that she was glad that he finally understood this. Lisbeth, smiling contentedly, told George that she simply hated her older sister, and she thought to herself that she also really wanted to kill her. She was angry that they were in the same place before the birth. But she was born second. Because of the 5-minute difference, she was always behind, while Rihanna received all the love from her parents, and she even inherited the right to manage the hotel. All the love and opportunities went to the eldest of them, and now Lisbeth wanted to return what she considered rightfully hers, what her eldest had taken from her. And I was going to do it at any cost. And if necessary, she was ready to stab Rihanna in the back. The girl had been jealous since childhood and harbored a grudge against her sister. And at the celebration, the bride and groom stood in front of the altar, and they swore an oath to love each other until death do them part. Both were happy. Their eyes were burning, and my thoughts were pure and full of hope. Rihanna listened with sadness to the wedding blessing. The church official, with the authority given to him, declared the couple husband and wife, calling on heaven to bless this union of two loving hearts. The heroes of today's celebration stood, all shining with luxury and happiness. And our heroine remembered her wedding, how she stood as a happy bride at the altar with George and was just as happy. Then the groom kissed her, and all she wanted was the sincere blessing of her little sister Lisbeth. And now the girl's family well-being has cracked, and in the near future there was a risk of completely falling apart. Rihanna now dreamed of seeing her husband covered in blood at her feet, and she was quite determined to take revenge on everyone who encroached on her life, honor, and well-being. She now often felt her sister's hand on her neck, but forewarned is forearmed, and the girl was ready to defend her right to life. Rihanna told herself that he who laughs last laughs best. She was sure that she had enough strength and hatred not to leave offenders and traitors in debt. The moon rose over the mansion. The entire garden was covered with the silver of starlight. Rihanna finally sat down for the first time after a hard day of work. No, she simply collapsed onto the chair closest to her. George also recently returned. He stood in front of his wife and unbuttoned the buttons of his shirt. He said that he had heard a rumor that their hotel was the subject of a tax audit. He checked to see if everything was okay. Rihanna answered in the affirmative, but she thought that this was what her husband was so afraid of. The man smiled contentedly. He argued that in this case they were very lucky. Rihanna asked what was bothering him so much, but he somehow just made a ridiculous joke in response. He said that he was simply embarrassed that this time the check was especially thorough. Rihanna sighed heavily in response, and so it was. This is the first time that such a large number of documents have been required for a tax investigation. The girl tried to keep everything secret. She wasn't sure how much longer she could hold out. After all, it was impossible to hide secrets forever. The girl was in the office and was holding an envelope in her hand. She stamped the envelope, and she called the maid Margaret, and she asked the girl devoted to her to send this letter to the emperor. His Majesty's palace was magnificent in the red rays of the sunset. The dinner table was already set. Silverware, delicacies, 2 glasses of red and white wine. Everything spoke of sophistication and wealth. The man nervously tapped his fingernail on the table. It was the emperor himself. He looked around with some impatience, as if expecting someone to appear at any moment. Finally, the sounds of women's heels were heard along the corridor. The girl bowed to His Highness, expressing words of greeting according to custom. The man thanked Rihanna for accepting his invitation. He was pleased and his eyes were shining. He invited Madame Royd to sit down. Our heroine and the emperor were sitting at the table set for dinner. A servant stood at a respectful distance ready to serve them at mealtimes. Rihanna found it strange that despite the luxurious decoration, all the dishes were served cold. What did the emperor want to say to his guest? The owner of the palace said that he and his guest had not seen each other for a long time. I wondered how she was doing. The girl assured that everything was fine with her. Checks are in full swing, so I could only complain about the many cases on this occasion. The emperor either asked or asserted that the girl definitely has to hide nothing from him. She replied that she would not dare to lie to the emperor. Rihanna assured that her love for the hotel is not as superficial as he thinks, that a few coins won't change anything. The emperor clarified the phrase about several coins. The girl replied that even for hundreds of coins she would not allow anything to happen to the hotel. His Majesty wiped his face with a white napkin. He agreed with the girl's words. He said that her statement made sense. He made a sharp movement of his foot under the table, making a sharp sound. Rihanna got nervous and started looking around. The emperor stood up and walked up to the girl from behind. Placing his hand on the back of her chair, he asked, standing over her, "Where does she hide the documents?" Rihanna shuddered involuntarily. In a firm voice, he recalled her words that if something unacceptable happened behind her back, she promised to find those to blame, to force him to suffer the punishment he deserves. The emperor claimed that the results of the investigation, for a reason unknown to him, changed the opinion of Countess Ruth. The girl bowed her head. She responded negatively to His Majesty's suggestion, claiming that she does not go back on her words and has not changed her mind. The emperor's face was surprised. Coolness, determination, and uncompromisingness were by no means feminine qualities. Rihanna continued to hold the initiative of the conversation. She informed His Majesty that she had come to him today to ask him for a favor. She begged him earnestly, no matter what happens or what is revealed. But the Norden Hotel should not suffer. The girl asked to promise her the safety of the hotel, and she undertook to fulfill any request of His Majesty. She pledged to be adamant, be it the honor of the husband or even his life. The girl's decisive words made the emperor think deeply. Rihanna checked with His Majesty that he doesn't need her hotel. She guessed that he wanted to destroy the Duke of McDonnell. The emperor confirmed Rihanna's guess. He said that her guesses were absolutely correct. The man sat down next to the girl on the chair. He said that he wanted to use the Count to expose the Duke. The girl assured him that in this case he could count on her assistance. The emperor sat half-turning towards the girl. He claimed that her offer was beneficial for him, and that she was able to interest him in cooperation. His Majesty asked if the girl was afraid of human condemnation, but she said that Count Royd was the first to betray her. The emperor asked Rihanna that when he fulfills his plans, then what will happen to her? After all, the ruin of the Count will affect her. But the girl replied that by that time she was going to be divorced from the Count. The emperor noticed that the girl was very upset by his spending, since she was ready for such desperate measures. Rihanna replied that it was not only that. She informed His Majesty that there was a more compelling reason for her desperate measures against her husband. In a fit of revelation, she admitted to His Majesty that her husband had been cheating on her for a long time. An expression of compassion and respect appeared on the man's face. The girl said that she was just thinking about divorce, but his action was the last straw of her tolerance. His Majesty rubbed his neck as if he had just received a heavy slap in the face. He expressed words of sympathy and regret. The girl admitted that he was the first person to whom she spoke out about her husband's infidelities. It turned out that it was not as scary as she thought. The emperor, looking into the girl's eyes, assured her that he would ensure the safety of the hotel, and he even obliged to return the funds misappropriated by the Count. But he asked me to promise not to interfere in this matter. He promised that if he failed to return the money, he would undertake to allocate it from the treasury. But Rihanna convinced that there was no need to take such extreme measures, that she wouldn't dare accept them. The girl argued that the culprit should compensate for the losses, and she asked to get her husband to return what was stolen from his wife by any means necessary. They agreed to carry out their actions on that basis. At the end of their conversation, as the emperor was leaving, he said to the girl that as soon as she needs his help, so that she immediately does not hesitate to turn to him. The girl thanked His Majesty. He replied that from now on he and she were allies. The girl thought that uniting with the emperor was a tempting offer. She felt calmer. But could such a thing be believed? She bowed to His Majesty, and she thanked her for the mercy shown. George happily said that fortunately the tax investigation was over, and he invited the sisters to celebrate this event. Rihanna asked, "Should I ask Benning the butler to bring them champagne?" Suddenly, Lisbeth interrupted them. She asked them to stop, and she put her hand on the table. She suggested celebrating later. She reminded them that they couldn't drink alcohol today. Rihanna didn't understand what her sister was talking about, and George caught himself. He suddenly remembered that today was his father's Memorial Day. Lisbeth looked into the man's eyes and asked how he could forget about such an important day. He looked confused and ashamed. He admitted honestly that he forgot about it, and he asked his wife if she had prepared anything for today. He claimed that he thought she had forgotten, but Rihanna convinced him that she remembered everything. "My husband said that's the case. That wake should be special." After all, this was the first Memorial Day since his promotion. The wife asked what he wanted, but he just waved it off. He told her to come up with everything herself, and how options will appear, so that she will tell him, and he will choose from them himself. Rihanna clarified that her husband wanted her to do everything herself. He confirmed, having said that she did not forget about her responsibilities. Lisbeth, seeing the intensity of family passions, smiled contentedly. The girl told her husband that she did not know that Memorial Days are so important to him. After all, when his father died, he didn't even come to see him off on his last journey. George asked his wife why she blamed him, but she replied that she was simply interested in the degree of his sincerity. The man said that his father was a terrible person, that he abandoned his wife and son, and eventually he just died. He hit the table with his palm. He said that he could not love such a scoundrel, that only she could take care of such a person. His face was distorted by a grimace of disgust. He called his wife shameless, that his mother's suffering is not her concern. The man flared up and defiantly left the company of sisters. Lisbeth just sighed heavily, and our heroine chuckled to herself. She thought that her husband understood his mother's pain, but at the same time made his father's mistakes. And I thought it was somehow ridiculous, and she believed that he was even more insensitive of both of them. She kept her hands under the table in her lap so as not to reveal her emotions. Rihanna walked up the stairs. She thought it wasn't funny at all. George was sitting on the sofa in the bedroom when she came in. The wife told her husband that she took care of his father while he was ill until his death, that it was her duty, and her feelings had nothing to do with it. She said she knew he hated his father, but she looked after the old man for the sake of her husband, and she hoped that he would be grateful to her for her feet, her care, and patience. George replied that he knew everything and understood what it cost her. He expressed his gratitude to his wife, that if he had left his father unattended to die alone, his reputation would have suffered greatly. But even so, he could not forgive his father. The man bowed his head in sadness and regret. His soul was torn by conflicting feelings. The man confided in his wife that his mother was naive. He cried a stingy tear. He knew that no matter how hard it was for her, she became a bride and had to fight. Rihanna reassured her husband. She said that no one would judge him if he did not forgive the kind of father he had. The girl stroked his back soothingly. She continued that there are people who simply do not deserve forgiveness, and she said that she understood his feelings. George turned into a wife, but she interrupted him. She told him not to worry about the Memorial Day. She said that she still planned to spend it differently. She recalled his words, that this is the first commemoration since the day of his appointment, and she wanted to have an unforgettable reception. George said that his wife was simply in a great mood. He said that he believed in her organizational talents. The man hugged his wife. He confessed to her that their wedding was the best thing that happened in his life. He spoke words of love to her. Rihanna couldn't believe his sincerity. She replied that she did not regret taking care of his father. In the end, she received a lot in return. The girl was straightening the man's green tie. She was wearing a dress of the same color. She said that she now carefully and meticulously examined him from all sides. The man said that Rihanna was increasingly disappointing him, that she might be tired, but she could at least see her husband through. After all, how can you sleep for so long when your husband is getting ready for work? George told the girl that his wife had no respect for him at all, that she acts so arrogantly, as if she is the only one working. Lisbeth calmed him down. She claimed that this gave her the opportunity to tie his tie today. Her eyes sparkled with puppy delight. The girl grabbed the man by the hem of his jacket, and she pulled him closer to her. I asked him why he was still not happy. He replied that everything was fine, that now he already likes everything. But his face remained tense and upset. He said it was time for him to go, that he already misses her. Spoke words of love. The girl answered him with mutual declarations of love. Their lips met in a kiss. The maid let out a surprised exclamation, and she hurried to Lisbeth. She showed her something and said that the gentleman forgot his pass. The girl grinned contentedly. She was already planning something, and she clearly liked it. The maid handed her the ministry badge. Lisbeth seemed to be asking herself what she should do. In her hands was a golden, multi-pointed star inlaid with chrysolite. The sound of women's heels was heard along the stairs, and then along the corridor of the mansion. The girl was already collected and dressed. Rihanna entered the dining room, but it was already empty. This surprised her a little. She asked the maid if Lisbeth had woken up yet. The table was set for only one person. The servants bowed and replied that the lady had already left the estate. The heroine asked her again. She knew that her sister was not a fan of getting up early. especially since she never planned things before lunch. The building was illuminated by the morning cheerful and warm rays of the sun. They danced like bunnies along the numerous huge windows and ran away into the green foliage of the garden. The girl walked up the steps and merrily hummed a song. The heels clicked to the beat of the moving melody. Lisbeth was sitting in a chair. She was looking forward to the meeting with joy. The door creaked and opened. George entered, surprised by her appearance. The girl rushed towards him and opened her arms. The man asked her what she was doing here. She answered him by asking what he thought. Lisbeth showed her sparkling ministry ID, and she asked who could have left him at home. The man gratefully accepted the star from the girl's hands, and he thanked her. The shameless woman pressed her whole body against the man's torso. She said that since she had already come here, it makes no sense for her to immediately return so quickly and leave him alone with these piles of papers. George could not resist the temptation and began to hug the girl tighter. He unceremoniously groped her buttocks and pressed her breasts. The man was excited. He was breathing heavily, and the head completely ceased to control the body and animal impulses. He said that he knew a quiet and secluded place here. Stained glass windows looked out onto the garden. Tree branches almost touched the glass, covering what was happening behind them. The girl was lying on the floor. The man was on top of her. He kissed her on the lips, and she held him by the neck. Rihanna was having dinner at the table. She was thinking about her sister's disappearance from home at such an early time, and she sat next to her and gloated. She boasted to herself that she couldn't even imagine what she was doing with her husband. Rihanna told George that she had put together a guest list for his father's wake yesterday. She handed the paper to her husband. I asked him to look to see if he would like to add anyone to this list. My husband asked why invite so many people. After all, that year it was half as much. Rihanna reminded him that he himself wanted to host an unforgettable event. He said that she was right, and you will need to prepare carefully. He promised to read it later and let her know if she needed to add someone to the existing list. Lisbeth emphasized to him that her sister would have more work to do, that she's already too pale lately, and I already asked Rihanna how she was feeling. The eldest of the sisters replied that it would not hurt her to rest for a couple of days, but I was going to do it after the funeral. She assured her loved ones that she would cope. The younger sister said, smiling, that when it's all over, the hard-working older sister will have plenty of rest from everything, so that she would be patient and wait a little. Lisbeth thought that her sister's fate was already determined. She eagerly asked her sister how she was feeling, and listened with joy from her as the disappointing symptoms of the fatal outcome of the disease developed. And the ministry was in full swing. George was greeted by a messenger according to his rank. He politely responded to the greeting. The guy said that he had been given another gift. Count Royd tensed when he heard this, and he asked what other gift. The guy pointed his finger at a bouquet of roses with a note standing next to him. The guy said that the flowers were the same as on the first day of work. Apparently, these were sent by a romantically inclined wife. George took the flowers with trembling hands, and his face betrayed tension and fear. Among the flowers, he quickly felt the envelope and hurried to read its contents. The envelope contained a short message. I know about your infidelities. George couldn't breathe with the horror of being exposed. He was shaking all over. Options were spinning in his head about who could know and who dared to threaten him in exposing his adultery. He looked from a distance at his colleagues who did not understand anything, and I thought about how they could find out about his betrayals. He assumed it might have been at the ceremony, or they might have seen them yesterday when Lisbeth came here. He asked himself another question. How could they be seen hugging in an empty room? And then there was a cry of trouble. George thought it could be worse. The guy shouted at the top of his lungs that His Majesty had arrived at the ministry. This message left almost the entire staff of their office confused. George stood confused in the middle of the office with a letter in his hand. Other workers were bustling around. A heavy boot crossed the threshold. The Emperor, dressed in a white suit, was accompanied by court ladies. Earl Royd greeted His Majesty according to rank, but he hid the letter behind his back. George, having caught up with the Emperor as he entered, said that it was a great honor for him to meet His Highness, and joyful greetings to the Emperor were heard from different corners of the office. They traditionally compared him to the shining sun of the empire. The Marquis greeted the Emperor personally, taking a break from the current affairs of the ministry. He bowed slightly and looked boldly into his eyes. He asked what they did to deserve this honor. The young Emperor replied that he had only come to find out how things were going, and he couldn't understand that everyone was so alarmed by his appearance. The Marquis asked to accept his respects, and George shuddered nervously, hiding behind the marquee. But he decided to stand out and got involved in the conversation. He said that it was a great honor for him to meet His Majesty. Continuing to clumsily suck up, the man spoke on behalf of the team, that she is grateful to His Majesty for the visit. He bowed to the Emperor's feet, and he vowed to try his best for the good of the Empire and the country. When the Count bowed, His Highness noticed an envelope hidden behind his back. The brunette showed recognition on his face. He clarified that he is the same recently appointed Earl Royd. George beamed with joy that he was recognized and his name was heard by His Highness. Straightening up to his full height, the man boldly confirmed that it was him. He said that he had been here only recently, and he was already lucky to meet the Emperor himself. The man grinned at himself with satisfaction, and mentally asked the Emperor to remember it well. His Majesty asked the Count if he was satisfied with everything in the treasury. He of course confirmed everything. He said that he tries to do his job perfectly. Having already turned his gaze to Marquis Parkinson, the Emperor said that he should get used to such an active newcomer. But the middle-aged man calmly and decorously answered that he was still inexperienced, and he still has a lot to learn. George began to blush with anger, because the old man again began his song about the incompetence of the young newcomer. He replied that he was doing everything in his power, and his skills are growing quickly. The Emperor squinted at the young upstart. He compared his behavior to a rooster's imitation of the habits of a peacock. The ruler thought about Rihanna, that she at some point succumbed to his charm. But it didn't last long. He told himself that such trash was not worth her attention, not to mention family life and betrayal. The Emperor answered the Count that he hopes his skills will be useful to the ministry and the imperial family. George bowed his head and promised without fail. He was grateful that they believed in him. He promised that he wouldn't disappoint. The Emperor turned around and walked out of the treasury office. The staff stood quietly until the door closed behind His Majesty. Count Royd stared after him for a long time. Then he felt an envelope in his hand, and his thoughts returned to finding a solution to who sent him with the threats. The soup plate was on the table. Shrimp, spaghetti, onion, parsley, and basil. The wife asked her husband what happened to him. He was already in a simple housecoat, and he brushed off her worries, having said that he was just a little tired today. The man wondered where so many flowers in the house came from. Rihanna said she walked past a flower shop and saw them. They were so beautiful and fresh that she decided to buy them. She asked her husband if it seemed like the house had become brighter. George sighed heavily but said that his wife was right, and I myself thought, why these flowers again? He felt somehow uneasy in his soul. Lisbeth reported that she was at a tea party, and Rihanna wondered how everything went with her sister. She reported that this time the Viscountess received a letter from the pervert. The fork fell from the Count's hands with a sharp sound. He stammered and apologized to the ladies. He said that his hand slipped. He asked if they had caught that crazy guy yet. Lisbeth assured that she would like to look at that idiot. She said how crazy you have to be to behave so vilely. George echoed the girl. He argued that even if he was a nobleman, he was the most insignificant thing in the world, and probably with very low self-esteem. At the same time, frequent drops of nervous sweat flowed from the man. The man slammed his palm on the table. He said that he chose the most insignificant way to attract attention to himself. Afterwards, he asked the ladies to forgive him, and citing a stomachache, he retired to his room, leaving the sisters alone at the table. Lisbeth was surprised and ran after the man. She asked what happened to him. Rihanna continued to watch the scene calmly. She smirked quietly to herself. The fire was burning brightly in the fireplace. Count Royd sat on the sofa, resting his head on his hand. Lisbeth stood next to him with her arms crossed. The girl asked if he was very impressionable. I wondered what was happening to him today. George told her that someone had found out about their relationship, and as confirmation, he showed the girl that envelope. Lisbeth took the paper in her hands angrily. She reread the short message, and I was at a loss as to who it could be. George admitted that it could be the Marquis of Parkinson, because he was the only one who could openly hate the Count. That even under the Emperor he humiliated George as best he could. And now the man admitted that that first bouquet could also be a trick of the Marquis's hands. After all, how did he find out later? That he took the place of the Marquis's protégé, whom he recommended. Therefore he admitted that this was the reason for the old man's anger at him. The man stomped his foot forcefully. It was as if he had crushed a cockroach in the face of the Marquis himself. Lisbeth cooed soothingly to the Count. She advised him not to do anything until they found out the whole truth for sure. The man huffed with anger. There was an interior bouquet of lilies on the floor. The girl suggested first finding out where the bouquet was sent from, and then you can ask who ordered it. Lisbeth offered to come to him tomorrow and pick up the flowers, and then she set out to look for someone who could make the same bouquet. The man, in a fit of gratitude, hugged the girl. He said that she was the only one he could count on. She grinned and replied that she and he were in the same boat. The fire blazed, consuming the flower. What was just in the hands of a girl? She told her beloved not to worry, that no one will know anything about their relationship. The glass windows sparkled with sunlight. Rihanna saw off kissing her husband. She wished him a good day. He was in a hurry to leave for work at the treasury. Lisbeth called her sister. She asked where her husband George was. She replied that he had just left. Seeing her alarmed look, she asked what had happened. The younger sister showed in her hands the badge for admission to the ministry that the man had forgotten at home, and she said that he left it again. Lisbeth claimed that George was wearing a different coat yesterday, and probably just forgot to change it this morning. The girl's face was alarmed. She asked what they should do now. Rihanna suggested asking Margaret to give it to George, and she asked if last time it was not the maid who carried the pass. Lisbeth suggested that she go in person, so that the ministry does not decide that George is too irresponsible in his work, and she could say that her wife asked to convey important information to him. Rihanna praised her sister for her good idea, and she agreed to do so, and she carefully handed her husband's pass. She said that she would be very glad and grateful to her sister. The girl was carrying a basket of roses. George thanked her for her help. She replied that it was not a burden to her, and he can count on her. She said that she would be on her way, and she flirtatiously said goodbye to him until the evening. Her steps and heels were muffled by the soft, long pile carpet. The girl was carrying a basket of roses along a long corridor. A brunette watched her from afar. When she noticed him, she was very surprised. It was the emperor himself. He glared at the stranger. The girl bowed low, greeting his imperial majesty according to custom, comparing him to the sun. The man replied that he didn't seem to know her, as if inviting the girl to introduce herself to him, who she is. She answered, not daring to raise her eyes to the emperor, that she is Lisbeth of the Norden family. The man became thoughtful. He realized that this was Countess Royd's younger sister. He remembered Rihanna's sweet, kind, and simple face, and I noticed to myself that you could never say that they were twins. He told himself that she was really beautiful, but compared to her sister, she looked simpler and more modest. And he admitted that if Rihanna divorced the Count, she would be able to rely on the imperial family. He asked why my lady was here and for what purpose. He assumed that the Count had some problems. Lisbeth told the emperor that her sister had forgotten to discuss something with her husband in the morning, and so she asked her sister to come to him and tell him. The man was satisfied with the girl's answer. He wished her luck. She asked him for permission to take her leave. The emperor thought that it was apparently difficult for Rihanna to communicate with her husband after his betrayal. That's why she sent her sister on an errand. He believed that the girl did not deserve such suffering, and I wanted to see her smile. Rihanna asked if her husband forgets his past too often. George didn't answer, he just swallowed nervously, and Lisbeth froze with candy in her hand. The girl continued to step on her husband, that because of him, her sister had to change her plans, and she reminded her that he didn't even thank her properly. But Lisbeth told her sister not to exaggerate. The girl said that thanks to this, she was lucky today to meet the emperor himself. She continued to boast to her sister that as soon as His Majesty heard her name, then he immediately realized that she was coming to Count Royd, and she asked George if he personally knew the emperor. The man, all beaming, confirmed his acquaintance with him. He said that yesterday he personally met with His Majesty, that he came to the ministry specifically to meet him. He told his wife that the emperor himself was interested in him. Rihanna couldn't believe her ears. She became all tense, and Lisbeth was happy. She told George it was just wonderful. She foresaw his imminent promotion. He proudly stuck his chest forward. He asked his wife's opinion. She agreed with her sister's opinion, that the emperor is definitely interested in him. George boasted that it was all thanks to his outstanding abilities, that the day when the Marquis will bow his head before him will come very soon. Rihanna thought to herself that His Majesty should not have come to the ministry in person. She didn't understand why he acted so riskily. Did he really care about her? She remembered His Majesty's interested gaze, with which he looked at her furtively. His words that he offered her his help came to mind. The girl remembered that sweet face that was instead of the usual stone one. Her face flushed at the mere thought that the emperor was interested in her. She felt ashamed of herself for having such thoughts. She realized that her heart was beating rapidly and was about to jump out of her chest. She considered it some strange coincidence. The girl tried to distract herself and told herself that it was time to eat. A maid stood in front of Lisbeth. She asked why she had to carry out the girl's instructions. She answered, feigning thoughtfulness, that because she told her so. The maid addressed the girl with all respect, that she had it all wrong, that she is not her maid. And if she wants to entrust something to her, then she must know the reason. Therefore the maid repeated her question, why should she look for a flower shop? Lisbeth showed her a letter with a note. She said that this business card was sent along with the bouquet. The maid shuddered. She almost cursed in front of strangers. She said that everything was kept in the strictest confidence, and I wondered who could dare to do something like this. Lisbeth told her that she wanted to know this too, and as soon as possible. She said that her sister might suspect something. The girl spoke to the maid with complete confidence, that she would soon become the mistress of the estate anyway, and she asked her if she could live calmly with such an attitude towards her mistress. The maid asked for forgiveness, and she admitted that she had crossed the line. Lisbeth asked the servants not to forget that loyalty to her means loyalty to Mr. George, and she is not as kind as her sister. The maid was holding a business card in her hands. She wondered who could be behind all this. She believed that it was clearly not about money. She suggested that there might have been a personal grievance. And then a thought came to her about Rihanna. She had enough reason to decide to take such a step. The flower shop was quite crowded. Fresh, soft pink flowers were in abundance here. The florist, who is also the owner of the shop, was just taking care of the tulips. She answered the call, interrupting her work. The maid stood in front of her with the basket that Lisbeth had given her. She asked if this basket of flowers was sold here. The owner of the shop quickly examined the flowers and the basket itself. She confirmed that it was all purchased from her. Then the girl asked to tell her who their customer was, explaining that her master wants to send a return gift, but does not know to whom. The blue-eyed florist sincerely answered that she could not help. She didn't know the buyer. What did the servant buy? The maid clarified that perhaps one of the nobles ordered the basket. The owner of the shop confirmed this. She said that a young maid had come. Of the young people in the mansion, only Margaret was present, who could fit the description of the florist. The blue-eyed florist remembered what she told her. The maid became all ears. She then retold it to Mr. George and Lisbeth. That basket of flowers was a welcome gift for a new colleague, and they also said that it was a little awkward for the customer to give such a gift, so he asked not to sign the note. George screamed that he had suspected old Perkinson before. He said it was just disgusting, that he won't just leave it like that, and he will make him pay for everything. Lisbeth calmed him down. The servant who entered warned of Madame Rihanna's return. George wondered why his wife returned so soon. Lisbeth said she would go, and she advised him to bring himself to his senses. The Count expressed his thoughts out loud. He wondered how the Marquis could have found out about his extramarital affair with Lisbeth. He admitted that someone had set everything up on purpose to confuse him. The maid expressed her opinion that the Marquis was not involved in this. After all, he had no evidence and therefore could not do anything. George said that he just wanted to intimidate him, and he considered it ordinary childishness. The maid said that fortunately Madame Rihanna had nothing to do with it. The man with a disrespectful laugh said that his wife was simply not capable of such a thing. The girl asked why the gentleman was so sure of this. The Count replied that if his wife knew about his betrayal, she wouldn't pretend to be a loving wife. The mansion would not have been able to withstand her scandal. He continued, that she is full of desire for revenge, she is capable of throwing a tantrum, but no more. Rihanna was too generous for sneaky things from behind. The maid decided to ask a direct question to the master. She fiddled with the hem of her uniform hesitantly. She asked her to forgive her for the disrespect shown, and she asked why he chose Miss Lisbeth. George thought about it. The maid continued to talk, that after 3 years of marriage their feelings cooled down a little and he began dating another woman. She understood that love could pass, but she couldn't understand why. Among all the women in the world, her master chose Miss Lisbeth. George admitted that she was the first to seduce him, and he decided that why refuse. The girl responded with surprise, that Lady Lisbeth is the lady's sister, that if he loves her then George should confess to his wife. But the man just waved her off and asked her to stop bothering him. He said she didn't know. After all, everyone knows that there is nothing better than having an affair with a married man. The maid chuckled imperceptibly. She did not understand the master's logic and could not accept his masculine position. The Count argued that a married woman, even under torture, would not talk about family problems. Otherwise, both spouses may suffer greatly. He said it was the same with Lisbeth. He was sure that she would not confess to her sister either. After all, a son-in-law and a sister-in-law cannot, by definition, be very close. George sat lounging on the sofa. He felt like the king of the universe. The maid was excited. The Count continued to be frank. He said that it also excites him greatly. He said that he was sleeping with his wife's sister, who was exactly like her. And this is more exciting than some secret relationship on the side. The maid was horrified by what she heard. She served George since childhood, and I couldn't understand why he had changed so much lately. She couldn't find Margaret anywhere. Another girl from the servant said that something happened in her family recently, and she heard Margaret asking Madame Rihanna for the weekend. The head maid was not in the know and was a little surprised, and she considered that Madame Countess was not involved in the case of blackmailing the master. She agreed with the gentleman's opinion, that if Rihanna had found out about his betrayal, she would not have remained silent, but would have caused a loud scandal. A bag of coins was passed from hand to hand. The maid thanked the florist for his help. She rejoiced at the unexpected monetary gratitude and said that it was not difficult for her. She said that her service had already finished with the flowers that the Countess ordered for the day of the funeral, and she thanked Anna for contacting the flower shop. The girl politely responded with words of gratitude, and she emphasized that that order was very important for the Count and the planned event. The mansion was illuminated by the scarlet colors of the sun. Margaret told the lady that everything was ready. The Countess's dark-colored dress lay on the bed. She continued to talk, that the owner of the flower shop agreed to help them, and everyone is waiting for her instructions. Rihanna was a little sad. She said that she still needed to finish a couple of urgent matters. She was holding a basket of flowers in her hands. The girl expected the reception to be magnificent, and she did this to honor the memory of her father-in-law and her honor. She enjoyed the scent of the white chrysanthemum flower. Suddenly, the door was opened. An angry George entered. He yelled at his wife. She, not understanding why he was so angry, asked her husband what had happened. He said that when he looked through the guest list, he saw the name of Marquis Perkinson there. The man waved a piece of paper in front of his wife's face. The girl made an innocent face and asked, "Didn't he plan to invite him?" He was angry. After all, how dare she invite that crazy old man to his father's wake? The man held the girl tightly by the shoulder. She answered her husband in a guilty voice that the Marquis was his boss, and she thought that people might think badly of George. But he replied that the Marquis only caused the problems themselves. Rihanna pulled her hand away from her husband's grip. She said that they were obliged to invite anyway. The girl was pleased with herself that she had angered her husband so much. He yelled and shoved the list in her face. He insisted that he did not want to see the Marquis in his house. As he left the room, he deliberately bumped into his wife with his shoulder, causing her to stagger and get injured. The man left, gritting his teeth in rage. Lisbeth called out to the Count. She asked him to control himself, but he continued to be nervous. He replied that how could he calm down? George told the girl that she herself knew, that bouquet of roses and the letter were the work of the old Marquis. Lisbeth persuaded the Count. She argued that this was why he should approach Perkinson. The girl said that there was no need to endure such an attitude forever, that everyone has weaknesses. She looked intriguingly into his eyes. She urged George to be kind to the Marquis and find out about his weaknesses, and she promised to help make sure that he would no longer dare to do anything. The man's expression softened. The man thought about it. He wondered aloud whether that cunning snake could have weak points. Lisbeth whispered in his ear, that everyone has weaknesses. The girl said, hugging the man, that he was her weakness. He responded with mutual recognition that she was his weakness. He agreed that he would tell Rihanna to invite the Marquis. The mansion was generously illuminated by the rays of the sun. The garden flowers were beautiful. The maid was caring for the plants in the flower pots. Skillful hands helped the lady put on the corset under the elegant dress, soon tightening the laces on it. Rihanna looked absolutely gorgeous. The lady's hairstyle was chosen, and on her head there were decorations in dark colors. Margaret's faithful maid helped her put on her dark dress. She voiced that her mistress looked upset. Our heroine leaned her hand on the table. She wondered what she wanted more. Revenge or save the family? Today it's time for the final choice. She told herself that she no longer dared to change her decision. The maid asked why her mistress was so afraid, but the girl answered that she was rather worried. She told herself out loud that for the sake of her family she had to end everything. Her gaze was crazy. Guests of different ages and occupations, invited to today's event, strolled through the garden. Rihanna walked among the guests and greeted them. The guest said that the girl gave an incredible reception, that as soon as the count received a position in the ministry, the commemoration became more solemn. She was surprised that the countess was personally involved in the preparations. She praised her for her exceptional skill. Rihanna modestly replied that she was only fulfilling her duties. The guests asked Rihanna where the count himself was, that they haven't seen him yet. She replied that unfortunately she herself did not know this either, and she thought to herself where her husband could have gone. The countess took her leave. She asked her to forgive her. Referring to the need to prepare for a speech, she left the garden, going to find a husband at the same time. The corridor was empty. A scarlet carpet led into a huge hall. Our heroine walked slowly under the bright lighting of crystal chandeliers. The maid Bennigan came to the meeting. She asked the girl if she had seen her husband. The maid claimed that he had gone into the garden. She smiled, but her hands that were holding the packed flowers were shaking violently. She said he left a different way than Rihanna came in. The girl tensed. She didn't think for long. She told the maid that she would go up to the second floor, that she forgot something in her room. Bennigan offered to help the lady. Rihanna refused. She said it wasn't worth it, that she had already distracted the girl from a lot of worries of today's difficult day of all days. The girl's heels stomped loudly on the stairs. The maid looked after her. The door opened and our heroine entered her room. Immediately outside the threshold of her chambers, she took off her shoes, remaining completely barefoot. She picked up the shoes and carried them with her. The girl crept as quietly as possible. She climbed up to the floor on her tiptoes. An uncontrollable trembling ran through her. First she heard voices and the shaking intensified. After a little control of herself, she looked out from around the corner. Her husband, pressing Lisbeth against the wall, unceremoniously kissed her right in the corridor. The girl moaned with pleasure and the man exhaled languidly from excitement. Lisbeth told the man that now was not the time. He convinced her that they had nothing to fear. His speech will not begin soon. The girl said that they were taking a lot of risks, that the Marquis Perkinson has already arrived. George asked if the girl really thought that the old man would rise so high, and he began to mock old age and its diseases. He said that it was just the two of them here and they had nothing to fear. Rihanna's heart was about to jump out of her chest. Blood rushed to her head and her ears were ringing. Her thoughts darkened at what she saw. She was clutching a pair of high heels in her hand. Her husband and sister were already naked and caressing each other's bodies. She so wanted to smash the head of her unfaithful and deceitful bastard husband with one swing of her shoe, so that Lisbeth would be scared when she sees a man's blood everywhere. And she stood victorious over the traitors, so that the sister holds the dying man in her arms and understands that she will be next. I wanted to see the fear in her eyes, and hopelessness on his face. I wanted to feel her whole body trembling, and calls for help, to crawl away from her like a pathetic, spineless creature. And Rihanna had power over her. How much longer should she let her crawl here in front of her, which she was deceived for so long and humiliated behind her back with her double betrayal, and tried to destroy by poisoning her? And so that Rihanna, waving her shoe, hears requests to give the shameless woman her life, and she made a hole in her sister's skull with her heel. I dreamed of seeing blood splashes all over the corridor. Suddenly our heroine woke up from her obsession. The couple made sounds of pleasure from lovemaking. They whispered and giggled. The countess left as quietly as she had come. No one noticed her presence. The girl moved away and held onto the wall. She felt very dizzy. She told herself that it was not time yet. Bare feet walked down the steps. She heard her husband's voice. He confessed his love to another, and his sister asked him to please her. The countess barely forced herself to calm down. She told herself that it was great that these two were still dating. She allowed them to enjoy their last happy day once again today. The girl was putting on her shoes. Bennigan heard the sound of heels as the mistress descended the steps. The maid saw the girl in a hurry. She asked Madame if she had found in her room the thing that she had gone looking for. Rihanna answered in the affirmative, smiling. She said that all preparations had already been completed. Guests walked or sat on benches prepared for events. The Count and his wife stood on the lawn in front of the gathered people. The girl quietly asked her husband where he had been. He replied that he had returned to his room, that he was there rehearsing his speech. The Countess thought that Lisbeth's lips helped him in this, but she told her husband that she couldn't find him for a long time. The wine was pouring into the glass with a clink. George and Rihanna stood side by side in front of the assembled guests. Finally, the young Earl, glass in hand, expressed his sincere gratitude to all who attended the anniversary of the death of the previous Earl Royd to remember his deeply respected father. He said that with all his sorrow and pain, he accepts their condolences and once again thanks them for their support. Next, he gave the floor to his wife, Rihanna Royd. The girl paused before her opening remarks. Her husband was happily sipping wine from a glass. Sister Lisbeth looked beautiful in her dark dress with a plunging neckline. Among the guests was the Marquis Perkinson. The girl looked through the paper with her prepared speech. She said that the Count was like a father to her, that he always treated her with all the love, that he always apologized if he was rude. George's face was tense. He could not yet understand what his wife was driving at. Rihanna said that now she wants to confess something. The husband chuckled into his fist. The girl clarified that she wants to fulfill the last will of the deceased Count. And then George shuddered. Rihanna said she wished she had made this confession sooner. Her face was sad. Behind the girl, her husband stood up from his chair. He wondered what his wife wanted to confess. The girl said that that night she dreamed of the deceased and reminded her of his dying request. And now her conscience is tormenting her, so she will fulfill his wish right now. The guests were intrigued. What was the last will of the deceased Earl Royd? Everyone began to whisper and whisper among themselves. Rihanna gave her introduction to the ladies and gentlemen gathered here, that he wants to introduce someone to them. The maid Margaret was leading a young guy about 16, 17 years old. He had light brown wavy hair and amazing light green eyes. He was timid and did not dare. The boy had wide cheekbones and sharp facial features. Rihanna asked guests to greet Joseph Royd. The guy was passing by George at that time, and their similarities were noticeable. The Countess said that he was the second son of the late Earl Royd. The guests began to whisper among themselves in surprise. Rihanna continued to say that the boy is her husband's younger brother. George was amazed by this news. A bony and wrinkled hand held onto a hand with young and elastic skin. An old, hoarse voice spoke to Rihanna. She called him father. The girl listened with all respect to every word of the elder on his deathbed. He said that he wanted to confess to her. She asked if she needed to call her husband, but he replied that George should not know this. He trusted his secret only to her. The old man told the girl that he had a son. She confirmed that she knows and his son is already an adult. But he replied that we were not talking about George now. The girl swallowed the lump in her throat. The man began to open up. That 15 years ago he overdid it with alcohol and made a mistake. As a result, that girl became pregnant and gave birth to a child. Then the man carefully hid this event so as not to upset his wife. And all he had to do was hide the boy in the village. The elderly man sat up in his bed. He said that when he died, there would be no one to take care of that child. The girl asked the Count if George knew about the existence of his brother. The man asked under no circumstances to tell him anything. He was afraid that something very bad might happen. The old man asked the girl to take care of the boy for his sake. He had never asked her for anything before. And now he asked me to look after my youngest son until he became independent. The man smiled. He believed that Rihanna could handle his last wishes. He believed in her decency and honesty. In response, the girl only shuddered. She asked the Count who else knew the truth. He replied that it was just the two of them. The girl asked if he was sure about this. He answered so that his daughter-in-law would not doubt. He asked her to take half of the medallion. He said that he gave the second part of it to his son. He said that the pendant would be proof that that boy was his son. He asked the girl for forgiveness for involving her in personal family matters. And he said that this was his last wish, and she is the only one he can trust. Rihanna wanted to object to something. The man asked her to take care of that boy, and these were his last words. He pronounced them with the last of his strength before taking his last breath. The girl was terrified, and the man has already closed his eyelids forever. The girl stood on the carpet next to the deathbed of the old Count. She had not yet had time to tell the man that she called him father. So many affectionate words. Didn't ask so much about that boy. Rihanna said she had to protect the husband she loved, and the son her father-in-law was hiding. She expressed the hope that the deceased would be able to forgive her, and now she stood in front of the funeral guests, who all knew the deceased, and she repented of the untimeliness of fulfilling the will of the previous Earl Royd. The Countess put her hand on the guy's shoulder. She said that the Count asked her to look after his youngest son. She admitted that 3 years ago she was too trusting and modest. Therefore, she could not fulfill her father-in-law's last wishes. But now the girl announced her determination to complete what she had promised the dying man. Suddenly, George jumped up from his seat. He shouted to his wife, who allowed her to do this here today. He pointed his finger at the boy and yelled at his wife in a voice that was not his own, cursing her with the last words. The Count pointed his finger at the boy, and he ordered to throw him out of here immediately. Rihanna calmed him down. She said that boy was his younger brother, even though another woman gave birth to him. But George continued to rage. He yelled at his wife that she was crazy, that he should not recognize some boy as his brother. The girl warned her husband to choose his words. I reminded him that he was a representative of the Ministry of Finance, and she reminded me that Marquis Perkinson was present here. Count Royd shrugged his shoulders and clenched his fists. He said that he didn't care who saw or heard him. He didn't care about that. He grabbed the boy by the starched edge of his collar. He shouted at him to get out, and he didn't dare appear in his house anymore. He threatened to force him away. Rihanna stood up for the guy. She believed that this was not the right way to treat a child, and she reminded him that he was also his brother on his father's side. George raised his hand. He shouted bad words about his brother and his wife. The man aimed at the boy, but the girl covered the child with herself and took the blow on herself. The boy asked his sister if she was okay. The Countess's cheek was significantly damaged. She staggered, but the boy was able to hold her by the shoulder. The invited people began to make noise. She got up from her seats and made noise about the family scandals she had seen. Rihanna told George everything was fine. She understood that he was upset and confused. The girl offered to take her anger out on her. But don't touch an innocent child. Count Royd was extremely irritated. He asked his wife if she at least understood what the existence of an unrecognized illegitimate brother threatened him with. He could not understand how a suddenly appeared beggar boy could lay claim to the inheritance he had received. He asked how he knew that he was his brother, that his father could have been anyone. Rihanna said that the boy had the other half of the pendant. She held one half in her hand, and the boy took out the other half to her. The halves coincided, making a whole pendant. George yelled at them to go to hell. His anger went beyond all possible dimensions. He snatched the pendant from his hands, and he threw it on the ground. It shattered into small pieces. The guests were shocked. They were making noise about the unprecedented family dispute between the Count and his wife and brother. George said that no matter what she said, the boy would not get anything from him. He was not going to fulfill the last wishes of his cowardly father, who had been having fun with prostitutes all his life. Rihanna reminded that today is a Memorial Day, that for the sake of his blessed memory we should stop putting on a performance for the guests. Earl Royd informed the guests that the ceremony was over. I advised the guests to leave. He shouted for everyone to leave. He turned around and left, leaving a confused wife and guests outraged by his rude behavior. Rihanna, seeing the effect produced, chuckled to herself with satisfaction. The garden was empty. The guests left the benches prepared for them. There was only scattered garbage, paper, mourning ribbon flying, and bunches of flowers for decoration were lying around. George continued to quarrel with his wife at the mansion. He rudely asked her how she dared to make such a decision without consulting him first. The husband proofread it, that if she cares about him even a little and loves him so much, then she should warn him about such things in advance. Rihanna predicted that her husband would have such a reaction. She said that if he had known about everything in advance, he would probably have harmed the child. And this is exactly what his father was worried about. The girl justified herself, that she was only fulfilling the last wishes of the late Count. George was furious. He said that he wouldn't give that boy even a coin, and he doesn't care about the will or anything else. His wife reminded him that according to the law of Esterasia, illegitimate children are full heirs, that if he refuses to share the inheritance, he will break the law of the land. But the man didn't want to hear. When leaving, he deliberately touched his wife with his shoulder. She replied that now he had no choice and that he should stop deceiving himself. George proudly left the room, leaving his wife to understand everything as she wanted with her opinion. The girl was brought out of her reverie by the boy's falsetto. He addressed Rihanna as sister, I asked if he could sit down. She politely allowed Joseph to feel at home and not be embarrassed. She asked Margaret to bring them tea and cookies. After all, Joseph didn't eat anything at the event. The girl poured tea from the teapot into the cup. The boy apologized that the Countess had suffered because of him. Their quarrel could be heard along the corridor of the mansion, but she said that it was not his fault. Rihanna said that she fought with her husband because of her desire to see him as the second heir to the earldom of Royd. The boy thanked her. The girl replied that it was not worth it, that she was simply fulfilling her father's wishes. The boy asked if the late Count's request was the reason for this. The boy claimed that the girl found him for another reason. Otherwise, he would have met her 3 years ago, right after the funeral of the previous Earl Royd. Rihanna confirmed his words. She said that he was alone all this time, and now he believes that she and George treat him equally. She asked why he didn't come himself. After all, his mother died last year, and he himself probably had a hard time coping with everything. He began to answer something to the girl. His heart was beating faster. But then they splashed water on him from above. Drops ran down the boy's face. George screamed at him to get out of here and out of his life forever. Rihanna tried to calm her husband down. He just screamed. He didn't understand what his wife could talk about with an uninvited claimant to the inheritance. He demanded that he be thrown out of the estate immediately. Rihanna stated in a confident and firm voice that no one would go anywhere. She reminded that Joseph is the heir of the Royd family. The servants were in a state of stupor. The Countess told them that they couldn't even lay a finger on the boy. George was furious. He yelled that since they couldn't do it, he certainly could, and no one will stop him. He was ready to defend his sole right to inherit his father's title and property. He raised his hand to strike the boy, but he covered himself with the tray like a shield, and his brother's fist hit the tray, bending it a little. Count Royd ground his teeth in anger. He was outraged that some boy allowed himself to do this. The boy was nice. He asked his older brother to calm down, but he became even more angry. He demanded that he not call him that again. The boy smiled and said that he was the son of the late Earl Royd, which means he is Joseph's brother. He said that until his coming-of-age ceremony, he would live in the Count's mansion and rely on his older brother for everything. The guy's eyes were burning, but George shouted that he would not allow this. Here, Rihanna entered into a brotherly dispute. She proved Joseph right. Whatever it was, he is also an heir. And she asked me to prepare a room for him on the 4th floor. The Count's rage continued to grow. He shouted at his wife that she was completely out of her mind. He reminded me that Lisbeth's room was on that floor. Rihanna looked at her husband with innocent eyes. She replied that there was no need to worry, because they were one family. But George said that men and women cannot live together. The girl smilingly replied that Lisbeth lives with them, and yet there is nothing between him and George. The man became noticeably nervous. He replied that she was probably right, and Rihanna, pleased with her victory, asked the servants to prepare a room for the young master. The door creaked as it opened. Lisbeth entered. She immediately attacked Rihanna. She shouted to her sister that this couldn't be done, that she couldn't live on the same floor as a stranger. The Countess argued with her. She said that even though George didn't know about his brother, she couldn't talk about him like that. She reminded Sister Lisbeth Norden that she was also a guest here. Rihanna reminded the girl that she lives in this house because of their sisterly bond, and if she doesn't like something, then no one will forcefully keep her here. Lisbeth looked to George for support. Rihanna turned her back on them completely. The husband supported Lisbeth's side. He told his wife that she had really gone crazy, and so that she doesn't forget who her family is. The girl was walking along the corridor. She knocked on one of the doors on the top floor. They answered in a falsetto voice that they could come in. The Countess invited the boy to stay in the room. She advised him to remain calm and wait for her instructions. What if he does everything she says? She promised that everything in the Royd family would become his own. The boy said it sounded tempting. He recalled his question that he had asked downstairs in the living room. He kept wondering why she left him 3 years ago. Joseph assumed that she was waiting for him to come of age, that it would have been difficult for him to fight for the inheritance if he had appeared earlier. Most likely the older brother would try to get rid of him. Rihanna praised the boy for his resourcefulness, but he said that he expected her to say about his cunning. The girl replied that no matter what he was, it did not concern her. Her face was thoughtful. She advised the boy to rest. After all, his role for today was over. In the morning, Joseph appeared at the living room table, beaming with happiness. The table was already set. He wished everyone good morning, and he said that he was glad to see his older brother. The boy pulled out the empty chair next to George to join the family breakfast. At this time, the man was cutting off the chop on his plate. He frowned and asked him not to call him that again. The boy asked, then how should he address him? He told him not to worry about rumors. For him, he still remained the most important person in his life. The man placed the cutlery next to the plate with a thud. George stood up abruptly and left the table. And he told Rihanna over his shoulder that she couldn't imagine how unpleasant it was for him to just sit next to this brat. Lisbeth called out to him, but he didn't react. Then she asked her sister why she was forcing her husband to be near Joseph, that you could just have breakfast in another room. Rihanna answered her sister calmly and decorously, that she is now Joseph's sister too, so she must follow all the rules, that you should not follow the example of George, who behaves rudely towards his brother. Lisbeth clenched her teeth in frustration. She put the spoon down on the table with a thud, and she abruptly jumped out of the dining room. Joseph sat a little dumbfounded. He didn't want to make so much noise in the mansion, and I would prefer not to claim any inheritance from the late Count. He told Rihanna that he seemed to ruin their morning with his presence. The girl replied that he was not to blame for anything. Margaret served at table. She poured red wine into the guy's glass. He thanked her politely. Rihanna raised a toast with a glass of wine to their successful collaboration. The guy wanted to admit that he had previously planned to refuse the inheritance and continue a quiet life. But now, for the sake of his sister, he was ready to change his plans. Their glasses touched and made a crystal clink. They cemented their faithful union. George sat upset, resting his head on his hand. His younger brother was sipping wine and looking at his pocket watch with interest. Rihanna chirped with the ladies. Her cheek was covered with a medical plaster. She told the table that she had to organize a wonderful ceremony that day. However, she only disappointed them and left. She regretted that terrible act on her part. The ladies unanimously answered her that she was simply an amazing person. After all, she fulfilled the last will of the deceased. Her friends asked how she felt after the Count's cruel treatment. Rihanna replied that she was fine, rubbing her cheek. She was glad that at least the boy was not hurt. One woman claimed that the boy was the cause of terrible rumors surrounding their family, and she didn't understand why the Countess was trying so hard to protect him. The girl with a sad face said that her husband could harm the boy in order to protect his reputation. Therefore, she hid that information from her husband. She understood that Joseph would soon be able to lay claim to the Royd inheritance, and the Count clearly does not want to share with his brother, who allegedly sullied the honor of his family. The ladies nodded their heads understandingly and agreed that Rihanna simply had no other choice. The girl sincerely regretted that she had upset her friends. They replied that there was nothing wrong with that after hearing her explanation, they knew the truth. Rihanna wondered out loud what could be more important than saving a human life. The ladies said she put in a lot of effort. The girl hoped that Count Royd would no longer interfere with his brother. After all, he is her beloved husband, and she will take care of him. The emperor said that she was a very talented woman. He sat familiarly on the edge of the table, leaning his hand slightly on the tabletop. This was his office. He continued to reason. The aristocrats think that Earl Royd is putting pressure on his brother over the inheritance. Moreover, his caring wife will always protect him no matter what he does. Rihanna directly asked His Majesty what his opinion was of her. He was a little confused by the Countess's boldness. The man chuckled contentedly. He said he was very pleased with her work. Rihanna placed a stack of papers on the table and told him to read it. She claimed that there was all the evidence of her husband's illegal spending, and the stack of papers was huge. The girl claimed that with them he could deal with George without any problems. She said that she wanted to give them personally to the emperor. His Majesty praised the Countess for preparing the documents so carefully. The girl replied that after the betrayal of her loved one, she had nothing more to lose. The emperor looked at the girl, tired of such a life. She was still so young, but she experienced such mental anguish. He asked if she was okay. He said that he had heard rumors that the Count had hit her. Rihanna dryly replied that when it was all over, her husband would experience much more pain. Therefore, she hoped that His Highness would use the documents properly. And she will bide her time. His Majesty reached out his hand to the Countess's face. She froze and barely breathed. The man was focused. The girl's heart jumped out of her chest. She called out to the man. He shuddered and pulled his hand away. The man noticed, despite the girl's beliefs to the contrary, that her wound looked painful. She claimed that she was not in pain at all. The emperor said that he could order medicine to be brought to relieve pain. That revenge requires strength. He asked her not to put herself in danger and to take care of her health. The girl assured that everything was really fine with her. The man reminded that they had made a deal and promised to help each other. He asked not to refuse his help. The girl assured that it was an honor for her. His Highness asked when she was going to get a divorce. The Countess asked to inform her when he began to act. By then, she will try to settle everything. The man in the red uniform who was listening to the Emperor's conversation thought to himself that a divorce after which the Count will lose everything sounds quite interesting. His Majesty told Rihanna that he would tell her about his plans in the near future. She smiled and thanked him for the help. An employee in a red uniform entered. He bowed to the Duchess, and he immediately turned to His Majesty that he should go to the temple right now. 30 years later, the oracle announced the prophecy that the next emperor will be born into the Norden family.